Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Truth Daily. I'm your host, Brandis P. Bonos, and I have an excellent episode coming up for you guys today. I hope you guys are very excited. If you guys have been following me for a while, I'm sure you've recognized that I changed the name of the channel. It is now going to be Truth Daily. I kind of just changed the name on a whim. The name popped into my head. I liked the way that it sounded. And so I said, you know what? Let's go for Truth Daily. And I think the reason why, and I guess this kind of leads to a more interesting conversation. A few days ago, Tuesday to be exact, I was listening to Richard Spencer on a stream with another person. I forget the individual who it was, or who the individual was to be specific, but he was on a call with somebody else, and he said something that I thought was really profound. He said something I thought was very interesting. And basically, where we are now in America is the polarization between the right and the left. It's deeper than just a difference of ideology or opinion or worldview, even. It is a racial difference. And when I heard that, I was like, what does he mean exactly? But after hearing him explain the concept, I began to think to myself that actually makes quite a bit of sense. And in essence, there's two races in America, these two larger races, the blue race and the red race. And of course, the blue race is the American left, and the red race is the American right. And you have different factions and different identities within these races, ethnicities, I guess. But the larger picture here, the larger race, is the red race and the blue race. And that's the reason why now we are at a point where the debates, the arguments about everything, immigration, ICE enforcement, free trade, our institutions, anything cultural having to do with LGBTQ issues, abortion, I mean, even imperialism, anything, foreign policy, the differences are irreconcilable. So much so that the left and the right function or exist as different groups altogether, different races altogether that can be almost discreetly defined. And when I heard that, at first I thought to myself, is that really an accurate way of describing the situation that we're in? Because people alter in between either race, if that makes sense. You have people who are moderate, people who are independent, sorry, there's a plane or a helicopter going by. But you have people who are moderate and people who are independent that basically hedge between either side. And I guess I would say I'm in that camp. I don't identify with either race, but I think what he's pointing at is something even more, what's the word? Palpable. And there is, as he explained it, credit where credit's due, as Spencer explained it, there is almost a symbiotic relationship between the left and the right. And either side really serves as a permanent enemy, a permanent scapegoat. And the radical left and the radical right, there is a symbiotic relationship here where they constantly have an excuse to escalate. They constantly have an excuse to shift the Overton window in either side for people in the middle. So the far right and the far left are constantly at odds with one another, and that gives the American left an excuse to shift their side further to the left, and it gives the American right an excuse to shift their side further to the right. And I think that this is really, this seems like a death spiral. It seems like a collision course. And this is something I've been trying to hint at on my channel, which is why I call the channel now Truth Daily. I don't really feel affiliated with either race. I feel independent, or I feel like I'm a part of the gray or moderate race, if that's even a thing. And I maybe have some left-wing positions on certain things and maybe some more right-wing positions on other things. But I think generally I don't feel closely aligned on a deeper level that I would identify with the left or identify with the right in any meaningful way. And so when I think about this and the way he puts it, it is bleak. It's very bleak because either side is really competing for power, survival. And I think the racial explanation and the racial framework that Spencer elucidates here is very interesting. And I actually think it's very appropriate because what is the idea of a liberal democracy? The idea is that different factions, different groups, different interests, different ideologies debate, they legislate, they argue, um, what's the word? They interact, engage one another to preserve the constitutional order, but to appease and satisfy both sides. This is the Madisonian view of politics. It's about social negotiation. It's about negotiating policy, negotiating on ideology, negotiating on legislation, negotiating on the future of the country, negotiating on various different things, domestic and foreign policy, to ensure the stability of the republic long term. That's the whole idea of a liberal democracy. Different groups, different factions engage one another, but remain loyal to a particular constitutional order. And they make sacrifices and compromises as needed to preserve this order eternally. But I think that now where we are in America, now that we have functionally two different races, the blue and the red race, I think now what we see is less of a Madisonian view of politics and more of a Carl Schmitt view of politics. I don't know, Schmittian, I guess. We have a more Schmittian view of politics, these sharp friend-enemy distinctions. And I think that is evidenced by what we saw the other day with Alex Preddy. You have people on the right who are saying he's a thug, he's a domestic terrorist, he deserved it, it was warranted, ICE didn't do anything wrong. And you have people on the left saying Alex Preddy is a martyr, he's one of ours, he was a nurse, he was this ICU hero, he's a patriot, he's standing on the Second Amendment, he didn't deserve to be killed, he's an innocent bystander. And you have two completely different narratives. One race, the red race, is saying he deserved it, he's not our guy. And on the other side, you have the blue race saying he is our guy, he did nothing wrong, he's a martyr. And these differences are irreconcilable. And for me, I look at the facts. And I can see both perspectives here. And I made this very clear in my last video. I said Alex Preddy, in spite of being a part of a rapid response ICE group, obstructing traffic, disobeying orders from a federal agent, 2 weeks ago, he kicked the taillight off of an ICE vehicle, in spite of stepping in between an agent who was trying to apprehend somebody else, getting in federal agents' faces, obstructing an investigation. In spite of all that, I do still think his killing was unjustified. He was on his knees, his face was pointing towards the ground, and they shot him in the back while he was defenseless, while he was in a defenseless position. And so for those reasons, just based on standards for the way that an armed force is expected to enforce the law, because obviously law enforcement is held to different standards, and they should be. They're an extension of the state, and for that reason, there needs to be a check on their power and the force they're allowed to use. In spite of all the things that I found foolish and reckless about Preddy's behavior, I do still believe that, based on the evidence and based on the video, his killing was unjustified. And I say that as an objective, independent observer who doesn't identify with either race. And I think that where we are now, these sharp friend-enemy distinctions are not going to heal anytime soon. They're not going to get better. That's for certain, especially in the aftermath of Trump. Do I think it's possible that maybe we can de-escalate the situation if we get a neocon in there or a more moderate person in there, like a Newsom or a Rubio? It's possible, but I don't know. It seems like the left and the right are on this collision course, and there is this symbiotic relationship and this appetite to inflict maximum cruelty on the other race, to inflict maximum suffering on the other race. And I think now, if you look at the way people on the right view Trump and view ICE and view the state, that the cruelty that they wish they could inflict on the left, the cruelty they wish they could inflict on them, they are now channeling that and living vicariously through the government and ICE, and they get this kind of psychological high by seeing the government that they live through vicariously inflicting death and inflicting harm on their political opponents of a different race. And Anyways, I know that's a bit of a long rant, but it does make sense, and I think these divides are so deeply entrenched, and I think that polarization is it's gotten to a point where now we have two separate races, and so I say that to land here. As somebody who is hedging between either side, and I actually encourage all of you to do the same, I think it is where we are now, we need to start thinking about how can we build a better society that doesn't utilize these strict left-right frameworks. I think that's a really important question that needs to be answered, and we need to start thinking outside the box. Um, to see if there's an appetite for that. Maybe people will get burnt out. Maybe people will become disillusioned with this left right death spiral that doesn't seem to be getting us anywhere. Maybe there will be an appetite moving forward for what we are proposing. What the moderates or the national transcendentalists like myself are proposing a different order, a different vision of the future that isn't dominated by people who are drunk on liberalism and people who are drunk on fascism. And I think there has to be a different alternative. There has to be a functional long-term vision that benefits the entire country, in spite of our differences ideologically. And I guess the reason I landed here is because over the past few months, and another part of the reason why I changed the name of the channel from The Sovereign State Show to Truth Daily is because I felt like the Sovereign State Show was very right-wing coded. And do I still have a lot of right-wing opinions? Of course, on immigration, on law and order. I have right-wing opinions on those things, but I do still have more of a liberal worldview in a sense, like a liberal worldview in terms of the belief that at a very fundamental level, liberals believe that we should work within the system, we should try to reform it. We prefer continuity over radical change, and we believe that engaging our adversaries or engaging our political opponents is necessary to ensure long-term stability of our republic. Those are things that I still value on a deep level. I don't want reactionary, uh, authoritarian fascism to take over the country, and I don't want like this left-wing, communist revolution. I'm not interested in either of those things. I like what we have now. I just want to improve it and tweak it. So on some level, I still believe in a democratic society, a liberal approach to politics, but I don't know if that term liberal applies to me anymore. And that's a separate conversation that maybe I'll get into, but I guess the reason I changed the name of the channel was because, like I said, it was very right-wing coded. And I read a piece in The Atlantic yesterday from Jonathan Roch, and I thought it was really, really, really insightful. And the piece of the title is called Yes, It's Fascism. I believe he wrote this on the 27th, and it's basically him explaining his thought process and how he evolved his opinion over time about the Trump administration, which he now believes is a fascist administration. And as a matter of fact, we'll actually go through some of the article here and then we'll react to the video. But this is really insightful stuff here. So I'm actually going to read this for you guys. I'm going to go down the list because for me, intellectual honesty and being educated and not being ignorant is incredibly important to me. That over any ideology. And so this is from Jonathan Roch, and I want you guys to listen to what he says. So this is, and I'm not going to read through the whole thing, it's long, but I'm going to read the highlights of it. So he starts off by saying, until recently, I resisted using the F word to describe President Trump. For one thing, there were too many elements of classical fascism that didn't seem to fit. For another, the term has been overused to the point of meaninglessness, especially by left-leaning types who call you a fascist if you oppose abortion or affirmative action. I accepted President Biden's characterization of the MAGA movement as semi-fascist because some parallels were glaringly apparent. Trump was definitely an authoritarian and unquestionably a patrimonialist. A patrimonialist is somebody who treats the government like it's their own private property to enrich themselves and their friends and their allies. He says beyond that, though, the best description seemed to be a psychological one propounded by John Bolton, Trump's first-term national security advisor. Bolton says, quote, he listens to Putin, he listens to Xi, he listens to how they talk about governing unburdened by uncooperative legislatures, unconcerned with what the judiciary may do, and he thinks to himself, why can't I do that? Over Trump's past year, what originally looked like an effort to make the government his personal plaything has drifted distinctly toward doctrinal and operational fascism. Trump's appetite for Lebensraum, his claim of unlimited power, his support for the global far right, his politicization of the justice system, his deployment of performative brutality, his ostentatious violation of rights, his creation of a national paramilitary force, that's kind of liberal coded, but I get what he's saying. All of those developments bespeak something more purposeful and sinister than run-of-the-mill greed or gangsterism. When the facts change, I change my mind. Recent events have brought Trump's governing style into sharper focus. Fascist best describes it. Now I'm going to go through the reasons. Now that's just the intro. I'm going to go through the reasons why he cites Trump as a fascist. He says demolition of norms, glorification of violence. Every state uses violence to enforce its laws, but liberal states use it reluctantly, whereas fascism embraces and flaunts it. His recruitment ads for ICE glamorize military-style raids of homes and neighborhoods. His propaganda takes childish delight in the killing of civilians. And we have all seen videos of agents dragging people out of cars and homes, partly because the government films them. Like the demolition of civic decency, the valorization of violence is not incidental to fascism, it is part and parcel. Another aspect of fascism that Roch lists is might is right. Might is right is also a characteristic of fascism. It is what George Orwell called bully worship. Stephen Miller, the president's most powerful aide, told CNN's Jake Tapper, we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world that have existed since the beginning of time. Those words, though alien to the tradition of American and Christian morality, could have come from the lips of any fascist dictator. Politicized law enforcement. Trump makes no secret of despising due process of law. He has suggested the Constitution's termination and said, I don't know, when asked if he has to uphold it. There's a bunch more here. Police state tactics, undermining elections, attack on news media, territorial and military aggression, blood and soil nationalism. A fascist trademark is its insistence that the country is not just a collection of individuals, but a people, a Volk, a mystically defined and ethnically pure group bound together by shared blood, culture, and destiny. Vance is called to redefine the meaning of American citizenship in the 21st century so that priority goes to Americans with longer historical ties. The people whose ancestors fought in the Civil War, as he put it, or people whom others on the MAGA right call heritage Americans. In other words, some Americans are more Volkish than others. White and Christian nationalism is another element of Trump's fascistic tendencies. Trump has found many ways to communicate this without explicitly saying this. For example, by making clear his disdain for shithole countries and his preference for white Christian immigrants, by pointedly accepting white South Africans as political refugees while closing the door to most other asylum seekers, by renaming military bases to share the names of Confederate generals after Congress ordered their names be removed, by saying that civil rights laws led to whites being, quote, very badly treated. In his national security strategy, he castigates Europe for allowing immigration to undermine civilizational self-confidence and proclaims, we want Europe to remain European, a rallying cry of white Christian nationalists across Europe. Leader aggrandizement. Since 2016, when he declared that I alone can fix it, Trump has cultivated a personality cult, governing as revolution. Although born in revolution, the American liberal tradition, especially its conservative branch, prizes continuity, stability, and incremental change guided by reason. Fascism, by contrast, is not reactionary but revolutionary, as Mussolini insisted. So there you have it, whole bunch of things that overlap with fascist tendencies. And this is essentially the point I'm trying to make here is that one of the major reasons why I've moved away from the right wing is because I do believe that it is it is headed in a fascist direction. Think about it. What is DHS doing with all these hype edits that are designed to animate the base, where they're dragging out all these immigrants and throwing them out of the country, and people are jumping up and down, excited about it? Or when Kristi Noem is standing behind a podium that says, "One of ours, all of yours," which is a Nazi slogan. Or this whole entire idea of heritage Americans. Some Americans are more Volkish than others. Some Americans have more spiritual Americanness than others, and thus should be recognized as being pure Americans. I mean, there's a whole slew of things that we could point at. And the purest example of this is Tucker Carlson. And Tucker Carlson represents a large section of the American right. And I have come to the conclusion now, in spite of some of the positive things that I've said about Tucker Carlson in the past, I have come to the conclusion now I do believe he is a fascist. He glorifies strongmen like Putin, Bukele, Viktor Orban. He has a spite for liberal democracy and procedural norms. He frames those things as obstacles that restrict the will of the nation. He emphasizes cultural decline and national decline over concrete policy solutions. For example, he talks about the death of family values, the sad state of young white Americans. He talks about Christians being under attack. He talks about the universities brainwashing you to hate whites. He talks about they, whoever they is, preventing real patriotic white Americans from being able to speak their mind or have access to certain information. He constantly says they hate you and want you gone. Masculinity is under attack. Your kids are being indoctrinated. The system is rigged against the white man. America is a declining empire. Foreigners are invading your cities. The government is protecting criminals and arresting patriots. Scientists and experts are really lying to you. Beauty, art, media, and Hollywood is creating cultural decay. These are all the kinds of things that you hear from Tucker Carlson, but he doesn't give any economic solutions. He just gestures at all these things that basically, this is just pure demagoguery that appeal to people's biases. He frames immigration and demographic change as existential threats to white Americans. He promotes these conspiratorial beliefs about elites trying to destroy white America. If you listen to his rhetoric, he always appeals to fear. It's always fear-based. It's always urgency-driven. It's always aimed at promoting a specific in-group consciousness. It's white Americans, it's Christians being under attack by everybody else. It's all this ethno-national framing where white people in white America and formerly white cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, New York City, these places are being hollowed out. The true nation, the true America, it's being hollowed out and replaced by foreigners. He delegitimizes our institutions. I mean, these are all the hallmarks of fascism. These are all the hallmarks of a fascist. And to give a concrete definition of fascism, if we were to give one, what is fascism? Fascism it's really more of an orientation and a template than a specific ideology, because Japanese fascism, Nazism, Italian fascism, all these things are different. The ideologies are different despite having some overlap. Nazism was based more so on blood and ethnic purity and ethnic superiority. Italian fascism was different, and Japanese fascism was different. They didn't emphasize those elements nearly as much. But if we had to give a concrete definition of fascism, it is an orientation which is characterized by grievances like cultural decline, a feeling of nihilism and hopelessness about the future, a sense of national weakness, demoralization catalyzed by a perceived fall from the nation's past greatness, and a belief that these failures are being facilitated by international enemies or internal enemies and selfish or decadent elites. And in order to save the nation from these existential threats, the nation must rise up and channel their will through the state or a particular dictator. And I believe that this is exactly where MAGA is. This is why they worship Trump so much. This is why they excuse everything Trump does. Because they see him as this strong leader who is saving the nation, a strong leader who is saving white America, a strong leader who is fighting against immigration, trying to restore America's past greatness. They see him as strong, fighting back against America's weakness. We're dying, we're being destroyed, we're being raped, we're being invaded, we're being taken advantage of, we're being abused. I will fight back against that. I will do it. I will war for you. I will channel the people's will. It has all the contours of fascism. Now, it hasn't manifested in violent exterminationist policy. We haven't reached that point yet, but the seeds have already been planted. And Tucker Carlson waters those seeds with every video that he posts. I mean, let me give you guys an example of what I'm talking about, and then we're going to get in the video because I don't want this monologue to be too long, but let me give you guys a perfect example of what I am referring to here. Just listen to this. This is from Tucker Carlson's interview with Peter Brimelow. He did this a few days ago, 11 days ago. I want you guys to check this out. This is truly incredible. Just listen to what Tucker Carlson says here. Just listen to this. Right at the beginning of the video, just listen to what he says. The intro is crazy. Just listen to this.
Peter Brimelow, thank you so much for doing this. I thought of you last week when I read this. I don't know how much you follow X, but there were a couple exchanges that suggested to me that things are changing very, very fast. Okay, so here's one. This is a tweet from last week, less than a week ago, from basically an anonymous account, and I'm quoting: "If white men become a minority, we will be slaughtered. Remember, if non-whites openly hate white men while white men hold a collective majority, then they will be 1,000 times more hostile and cruel when they're a majority over whites. White solidarity is the only way to survive." Okay, that's on the internet. Elon Musk retweets it and says, 100%. And then Elon Musk writes this: "If current trends continue, whites will go from being a small minority of the world population today to virtually extinct!" Exclamation point. All of that, in my opinion, is obviously true.
So there you have it. That is Tucker Carlson. And here's the irony of it. He'll say that, if white men no longer hold a collective majority, we'll be slaughtered once we're a minority in America. He'll post stuff like that. But then he'll do an interview with Cenk Uygur, which he posted today, and nod in agreement about, yeah, we're all Americans. We're all being divided based on race. We all need to stand up and fight the system. And it's complete bullshit. He doesn't believe that for a second. Or at least if he does, that directly contradicts it. How can we all be Americans if you believe that my tribe in America, if whatever the fuck that is, black people and brown people and immigrants who have children who are American, who are born in America, will try to destroy and kill you, another American, a white American, if you are no longer in the demographic majority? How does that work? How are we supposed to unify exactly? How are we supposed to unify to fight the elite if you believe that white Americans as an ethnic group are under attack from every other ethnic group in America? How does that work, Tucker? It's directly contradictory. You have to be clued in and pay close attention to what these people say. They cannot be trusted. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, this urgency, this fear, this in-group, out-group thinking that he promotes on his channel, on his platform, waters the seeds of fascism. Because what happens when people believe that their group is under attack, is facing existential threat? They panic, they get fearful, they lash out. and they take the most radical path forward, voting in the most radical person. If you can make people fearful, if you can make people paranoid, if you can make people feel like their survival is in jeopardy, they will do anything to protect themselves. As long as you frame it defensively, as long as you put it in existential terms. But we're supposed to unify with this person on this populist agenda. How does that work? People that think we're going to kill them, they're going to rise up and kill every white person in the country like it's South Africa. How does that work? It doesn't make any sense. If the idea here is that they want you dead, they want you killed, meaning the government, meaning bureaucrats and elites, if they want you dead, if they hate you, if your vote doesn't count, if the West is in decline, if media hates whites, if the institutions are indoctrinating us to hate America and hate white people, and white people are under existential threat from non-whites, what is the solution then? There is no institutional solution. There is no political solution. Shit, there is no social solution because we're ethnic tribes at war, according to his perspective. So what is the only option left other than for white people to kill us? Or vice versa? War, violence. Yet he says he wants to avoid that, but he waters the seeds and he waters he promotes these ideas that lead to these kinds of violent conflicts. It doesn't make any sense to me. And this is why I've said some positive things about him in the past, but not anymore. I think he is just a fascist, honestly, who is watering the seeds for a race war, potentially. So that's my opinion of Tucker, and that's why I kind of belabored the point, but that's why I've moved away from the right and closer to the middle, because I don't want anything to do with watering those seeds. So I know that's a long monologue, but I felt like all that needed to be said. Now, with that out of the way, we are going to go ahead and get into this reaction to the Dispatch. The Dispatch is really good, by the way, guys. I think you guys should all go check out the Dispatch. Go subscribe to their channel. They do great work. I think you guys will thoroughly enjoy it. But I want you guys to learn and become cognizant of, or actually just hear from people who are intelligent. I feel like that's nice and refreshing to just hear from people who know what they're talking about, who read, who write, who care about principles. It's just refreshing to hear from people like this. So I guess with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. Thank you guys for listening.
On this week's roundtable, we'll discuss the aftermath of Alex Preddy's death in Minnesota. Is Donald Trump backing down? And we'll look overseas to the massacre of protesters in Iran and a potential show of force by the United States. Finally, and not worth your time, we'll look at injuries, old man injuries, weird injuries, funny injuries, lots to discuss. I'm joined today by my Dispatch colleagues Jonah Goldberg and Kevin Williamson, as well as Dispatch contributor and Washington Post columnist Megan McArdle. Let's dive right in. Welcome all. As I said in my note to you all yesterday, I'm looking forward to a discussion where we don't have to focus all of our time on Donald Trump and the things that are in the news. There are all sorts of issues beyond the headlines that I would like to discuss with this group, but this is not going to be that week. We are going to talk a lot about what's in the news. And I want to start with what's happening here domestically. We are 5 days after the killing of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. One of these moments that seems to have sort of broken through beyond the people who follow news, beyond the political discussions and debates that we have in this country, to the point where you have Dave Matthew making a song and Bruce Springsteen making a song and Victor Wembanyama, the NBA star from France, weighing in. This is something that has pushed beyond the normal collection of people that we might expect to talk about this. President Trump in the last few days has sent signals by the changes in personnel that he's made that he may be backing down a little bit or rethinking, or at least making moves that we might consider PR moves. He seems the White House and Trump seem to recognize that there's something wrong, that this is striking people as something that went too far. And you're seeing a leak war emerge from the White House and the cabinet agencies, with people seeking to avoid blame and people seeking to assign blame. Megan, 5 days out, where are we on both this shooting and the killing of Alex Preddy and this bigger debate? Do you expect to see any changes, or is this a sort of a tactical pause from President Trump and the White House, and we're likely to see him continue doing what we're doing?
I do think I expect changes, because I think that the administration has belatedly realized that the Jedi mind trick strategy, where you just tell people things that aren't true and they kind of mindlessly repeat them, is not going to work. And they tried that with Renee Good. She was a domestic terrorist, right? And they tried it again with Peretti, saying he'd been brandishing his weapon and he clearly intended to massacre cops. And that's
another. I'm glad that they brought that up, because that is another cornerstone of fascism. It is to just deliberately lie to the audience, to say that this particular, I mean, I think protester is a bit of a misnomer. He's not really a protester. Preddy was really an impeder, if anything. But I guess for the sake of convenience, we'll call him a, quote, protester. But this particular protester, Alex Preddy, they say they claim that he brandished a firearm, he was trying to kill law enforcement, he wanted to inflict maximum damage. Obviously false claims, like just verifiably false. And to make matters worse, Trump came out and said it was a tragedy. Then you had Stephen Miller come out and say ICE might have violated protocol. And then you had Kristi Noem initially make the statement, and then everybody else in the administration walks it back, and it looks ridiculous. It looks completely sloppy, uncoordinated, weak. But this is what fascists do. They just deliberately try to lie and reframe everything in the most extreme terms possible to gaslight the public into thinking the person that the state killed was actually in the wrong, when they obviously were not. Or rather, they obviously didn't deserve the punishment that the state inflicted on them. So you have to be very clued in on these particular things. It's very important. We are in a political crisis. I hate to be that guy, but that's where we are. That's why I brought up that point about the red race and the blue race being so polarized, because we are witnessing the decay of our political order. It is happening in real time, and you need to understand where this could lead if you are not weary of the potential consequences and the tactics that these administrations and these types use in order to, plant the seeds for a more sinister long-term objective.
Failed, and you can see it in the polls. And Trump, I think the thing to understand is that, well, Trump really does have a deep opposition to immigration and trade that goes back decades. He really does think that these things are bad for the country. He's not an ideologue in the way that Stephen Miller is an ideologue. And he's much more politically sensitive than either Miller or Kristi Noem, who has been running the show. Noem's incredible political instincts are represented by the fact that she thought it would do her good to talk about shooting a dog. Even if you had to do that, and I can understand circumstances.
Which she mentioned in her own book. She described in her own book.
Yes. Yeah. She thought that was going to be something you should tell people. I don't know if it's true or not. It doesn't matter. If you did it, that would be something that you should never, ever, ever mention in public.
Except it's a terrible old yeller kind of, it broke my heart to do this thing, right? But she kind of bragged about how proof she was a tough mom kind of thing.
Yeah, weird. Because she did it herself. She didn't let the vet put this dog down, right? So just first of all, yes, in the 19th century, this was perhaps an appropriate way to think. It is much kinder to let your dog go gently to sleep than to shoot it. Right? Like, taking responsibility for a creature means taking responsibility for treating it as well as possible. Every dog owner has faced the terrible choice of having to decide when the dog's time has come. And it's an awful thing to have to do. I sobbed wildly. I have sobbed wildly every time it was time to let a dog go. And it broke my heart, but it has to be done because you are in charge of making sure that their life ends as well as possible, as well as that their life is as good as possible when they're alive. But like, why would you do that in the first place? And then why would you tell people? Because you are an idiot. And
or possibly because the dog was interfering with a federal law enforcement action.
Right.
Yeah, possibly the dog may have been a domestic terrorist, right? And that Trump, whatever else you say about him, he does have pretty good political instincts for when he has gone too far and the public is revolting. And I think you've seen this with tariffs too. He has done stuff, realized he's gone too far. He doesn't like say, I went too far, that was a bad idea, but he kind of quietly backs off because the thing he cares more about than tariffs even is that he cares about people not hating him so much that his life becomes a misery. Or I should say, he cares about the public. He doesn't care about, the owning the libs remains near and dear to his heart. And so I think Trump has read the tea leaves and has realized that leaving these morons in charge of the operation can only do him harm. And he's pulling back. And I wouldn't be surprised if, like, Noam, for example, gets quietly separated, announces that she wants to resign more to spend more time with her family, complaining about getting fired. And like, I do think we're going to see less of this, but that doesn't mean that I think there's going to be a good turnaround on immigration policy. I don't think that this means that the administration is like getting its act together and is going to do good things. But I do think that Trump is not going to let it go so far that he is spending all of his time dealing with complaints about citizens being shot by Border Patrol agents who just aren't doing a good job, who are acting like thugs. I'm sorry, I got no other word for it, right? They are acting, there's the incident the other day. They tried to chase someone into the Ecuador.
I mean, in many cases, this is just true. I mean, I know it might be in poor taste to use the word thugs. Maybe it's not academic or politically precise language, but I think that when you consider the way that they behave, they're running up on people with a mask, they're trying to intimidate people, they threaten to use overwhelming force or physical force or violence on you. They try to intimidate you using a certain physical presence or the threat of force to get you to comply with them. They don't identify themselves. There's just a certain aura and a certain presence with a lot of these ICE officers that is meant to intimidate and incite or instill fear in people. And that is, in a sense, similar to what a gang member does. The police don't really do it in the same way. They want you to feel, ostensibly, some of them, they want you to feel like you can trust them. They're nice to you. They don't raise their voice. They're rather polite. Obviously, these are psychological techniques, but at least there's a pretense of trying to be a decent public servant. With these ICE agents, it's not that at all. There is no pretense of that whatsoever. It's we're here to kick your ass, and if you don't listen to us, we're going to fuck you up. A completely different tone, a completely different disposition between cops and ICE agents. And like I said, generally I support ICE, I support Customs and Border Patrol, I support deportations. But man, people will not be able to stomach this over the long term. Decent people with a conscience will not be able to stomach this over the long term. Just the harassment, the intimidation, the dimension and the component of fear, instilling that in the citizenry, I don't think people will be able to tolerate that over a long term without revolting, not in a decent society.
Dorian consulate, which is not.
It just echoes tyranny way too much. It echoes tyranny in a police state way too much for people to just idly stand by and support it.
U.S. territory. And when the consulate said you can't come in there, they were like, if you touch me, I will like hurt you. No,
Yeah,
you
literally.
That is another country's territory. You are threatening to invade it. You are obviously not trained for this. Obviously do not understand the natural and good limits on government power.
Correct.
And I think we have seen that over and over again. And I am sure it's a very hard job. But if you are not capable of doing that hard job without shooting people, you should get another job.
Correct.
There are many other jobs out there.
Yeah, it must be said, and The Atlantic has done some good reporting on this,
Absolutely.
that the group of people who are working for ICE these days is different than the group of people who were working for ICE a decade ago. I mean, they've gone on a sort of a recruitment surge. They have lowered standards in some ways. They have minimized training, and I think you're seeing appeals to come work for ICE in a way that's recruiting people who might behave in the way that you behave, Megan. I want to go back.
Yeah, they're telling them that they're protecting the white ethnic homeland. They're defending Western civilization. They're removing foreign invaders. And the people who work in ICE legitimately, in many cases, believe this. They do. Straight up. And there's leaked audio of this, and we know about ICE officers, through the New York Times and through various sources, that there are people in ICE or people who are former ICE officers or people who work with ICE or at DHS who do share this view of the world, this like racial war, this belief that different tribes and nations are in constant conflict and they have to defend themselves. Like, well, many of them do have that ideology, and yeah, that's why it's not surprising to see many of these people behaving the way they behave.
Megan's point about Kristi Noem, I hadn't really thought about it in this way. But, Megan, it's certainly true that Kristi Noem thought that she was going to win plaudits or tough girl points for including that story in her book. And I guess I wonder whether it maybe worked. Right. I mean, she got the job. She wasn't disqualified. I mean, there was sort of 2 days of chatting about it in the public discussion on cable news and elsewhere. And most people were horrified. And people in the administration who went on to bring her aboard, if I've got my timing right, were not. And so she's in the position. And there is, I wonder, I mean, we had heard before this rhetoric from the president, rhetoric from Donald Trump as a candidate, rhetoric from Donald Trump in his first term that justified what he called rough treatment of criminal suspects in a strategic way. I mean, he gave a speech in Erie, Pennsylvania, a month before the election, in which he called for one real rough, nasty, and violent day of police retaliation that would eliminate crime immediately. He said 1 rough hour, and I mean real rough. The word will get out and it will end immediately, it will end immediately. The campaign said, well, the president was just saying this in jest. He didn't really mean it. I'm not suggesting that the president is calling for things like we've seen with Renee Good and Alex Preddy. But when you use that kind of language and you use it repeatedly over a decade, don't you help set, Kevin, the
obviously
set the environment for cops to behave in this way? And when the cops, ICE, Border Patrol, we should definitely not lump them all together. But for the purposes of this question, law enforcement broadly, see this or see the administration leap to the defense of the officer who shot Renee Good, as Megan says, and they immediately suggested she was a domestic terrorist. Does that not create, if not incentives, to use Jonah's favorite phrase, permission structure for this kind of aggressive law enforcement tactics?
Yeah, I'm picturing him like flipping channels off of Fox News because there's someone on that's boring, or it's it's a dentures commercial or something, and he hits the purge for a couple of minutes, and he's thinking, hey, we can do this, we could work with this, right? This is a way we could do things.
So I haven't seen The Purge. Can you just give me a one paragraph synopsis?
So it's like 24 hours when the law is suspended, and anyone can do anything they want. And it's essentially like a population control kind of method. And so you have to either hide out or you become the mutant killer or whatever. But I think that what in many other contexts would be called terrorism is his plan here. It's what he wants to do. This is why you send ICE and Border Patrol into Minneapolis in response to a welfare fraud scandal that doesn't have anything to do with illegal immigrants. It's about theater, it's about scaring people, it's about intimidating people and provoking confrontations.
I mean, yeah, many of the illegal immigrants that live in this country live in the South. They live in Texas, they live in Georgia, they live in Florida, they live in red states. So there is a political motivation. I don't know who put this in Trump's head, but there is a political motivation here. I mean, only 1% of the illegal immigrants in this country live in Minneapolis or in Minnesota. There's like 10% that live in just Florida and Texas alone. Those are red states. But you don't see these kinds of brutal tactics being deployed. So there is obviously an element of political brinksmanship or maneuvering that is taking place here. And I think a lot of it is being done to animate the base. That's just my 2 cents, though.
And so he's getting what he wanted out of it. He just thought it would be more popular. I'd like to, and forgive me if I'm repeating myself here, but I'd really like to sit down with Trump and ask him what his theory of the case is about why he can't hire good people. Because he does this thing where, and Kristi Noem's getting it right now, where he develops this sudden amnesia, and like people will ask him about things they've said. Oh, I never heard anything about that, or I don't know about that. And then he suddenly forgets these people exist. And after he fires him, it's like, I never really knew that guy. But I want to ask him, like, you've had, attorneys general, you've had, senior political people, you've had senior military commanders that you've put in place and national security people that within a year, 18 months, you had to say, he was stupid, he was incompetent, he didn't know what he was doing, he was terrible. Why do you keep hiring such bad people? And we know the answer to that, right? Because Trump's only real test for people is abject loyalty and media presence. And Kristi Noem is a loyalist, and she looks like what he thinks a human being is supposed to look like on television. And which I'm not sure he's entirely right about that in his judgment, but that's his point of view on that. So she's the female Pete Hegseth. She's got a big media presence, and she looks like what he wants the person in that role to look like. And whether she has any administrative ability or the ability to manage a large, complex organization to achieve a complicated and difficult policy outcome is beside the point as far as Trump is concerned. But he goes through these cycles of putting these people into sensitive positions like that, realizing they're terrible at it, realizing that the American people at some point want government to be good at the things it does and not bad at the things it does. I mean, mainly the American people don't care. They're there for the show too, but at some margin, it gets bad enough that people start to push back. And we're seeing that in Minneapolis, certainly. And I also think the fact that it's Minnesota kind of, it would be different if it were Chicago or if it were New York City or Los Angeles, but it's this kind of, Midwestern, famously nice people sort of thing. It's like, if you can bring that out in these people, and now we all know Minneapolis actually isn't that Minnesota nice. It's a very different sort of place with some pretty nasty local politics in some ways.
Right.
But he just, he doesn't know how to do the thing that he's trying to do. And I think that he's running into the limits of the reality television version of politics and of the presidency. He likes the drama. He likes the theater. That's his main thing. That's really what he's in it for.
But it's getting real now.
But it only goes so far. Now, it goes farther, I think, than any of us thought it would in 2015 or 2016. It goes real far. But there are limits to it, and I think that Trump is running up against those limits.
Jonah, Megan mentioned the sort of hasty response from administration officials, again in the killing of Alex Preddy, as they had in the killing of Renee Good some 3 weeks earlier, to try to shape the narrative, making claims, saying things that not only weren't true, but obviously weren't true if you had watched the video. And there were many videos. Anybody who watched them could see, there was no evidence that he had come to commit a massacre, which was one of the early claims, that he was also a domestic terrorist. One of the things we've talked a lot about this inside the Dispatch in our Slack conversations and our editorial meeting. Why do you think they do this? Why do they say things and make claims that are demonstrably untrue in the face of video evidence to the contrary?
Well, I mean, the short answer is because they're what social scientists call liars. And I think that's a big chunk of it. I mean, so part of it,
but they have to know that they're going to be contradicted, right? There's video.
Well, see, but that's the weird thing, right? So first of all, we should say, the fact that so many people can disagree about what multiple videos show gives you a sense of, first of all, how much easier public officials had it before the panopticon of the iPhone world existed, where you actually had to take people's word for what happened, right? I mean, imagine if there were no videos, they could probably get away with claiming that he was brandishing a weapon, because he didn't have a weapon, right? But they can't get away with lies to that extent, to a certain extent. I think there are two things. One is a very meta point. I think that this administration, conservatives are really good about criticizing the left, about caring about narratives, right? It's a thing that conservatives have learned from their own elite 4-year higher education experience, is how to speak the language of the left on a lot of things. So they talk about narratives and semiotics and all these kinds of things. But they've also internalized a lot of that crap. And so they care about the narrative, and it's a kind of a print the legend approach of just asserting what you want your very loyal spinners to say.
Yeah, you can literally just assert things. Literally just assert things that are patently false, which is absurd. And it's what's strange is here's the thing. The narrative that they'll run with on TV is supposed to create a reality distortion field. And even if once that narrative is out there, even if people see the video and it directly contradicts the narrative, because they have been so programmed and primed to believe what the administration says, they will still try to find a way to rationalize what their eyes tell them about the video to fit the narrative that the administration runs with. So they still, either way, get lost in this reality distortion field and look for ways post hoc to rationalize what their eyes tell them. And it forces them to take on these mental gymnastics. It's really weird stuff. It's really weird stuff, man. And it's the thing that's so frightening to me is for me, there are so many opinions. There's so many angles of the video. There's so many retellings of the video on social media that there's functionally no way you can ever get a coherent and consistent retelling of the events that is accurate and unbiased. The whole point is to taint the truth. That's the reason why they say these things that are obviously untrue. It is to taint the truth, to taint the event that took place. So if you're somebody like myself, you have to actually go through the process of just completely abandoning the video and abandoning social media and find an alternative source of information to construct your own understanding of what took place. But most people just won't do that, unfortunately. And the administration knows that.
And that kind of forces people to see the videos the way you want them to be seen.
Right.
This is really clear, I think, with the shooting with Renee Good, is that they kind of understood in a cynical but accurate way that if you let
like once you say the word, this person was a domestic terrorist, this person tried to impede law enforcement, this person tried to kill a law enforcement officer, and so on and so forth, once you say that, even if it's not 100% accurate, or it doesn't actually justify the events that took place, or it doesn't encapsulate the entirety of the event, even once that narrative is out there, you just throw out so many different narratives that people just get lost. That is what it is. That is the reality distortion field. It's cranking up the gain. It's cranking up the noise, the signal, so that you can't hear anything. Or rather, it's cranking up the noise so high that you can't hear the signal.
the
They're
Black
brilliant.
Lives Matter version of the George Floyd video gel into
It works perfectly, actually. If you do it, if you're not an idiot and you can do it, it works perfectly.
public consciousness, there's no refuting it down the line. And so they wanted to, and I'm not saying that their left Black Lives Matter version of the George Floyd video was entirely wrong or anything like that, but he wasn't actually choked to death. It was something else that killed him, and it still was a terrible thing. But my point is, like with the Renee Good thing, they got out really quickly to say that the version of events that don't believe your lying eyes and the version of events that you're being told by Rachel Maddow is not true. This guy was in fear for his life, blah, 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 blah. And it worked to a certain extent, right? It made it contestable space rather than consensus.
Right.
And I think they felt a little bit
Yeah, the goal is to always contest and pollute the truth. That's the goal.
of success doing that with Renee Good. And so they tried it again with this case. And it was just a couple bridges too far in terms of the egregiousness of the lie. The second thing, and this gets to something where I have a slight disagreement with Megan about. So first of all, there's been a lot of reporting on this, that there are basically two factions in the anti-immigration world of the Trump administration. There's the side that wants spectacle, right? This is the Stephen Miller side that wants it to be as ugly and as scary as possible, to strike fear in people so that, first of all, people will act on the fear and you'll get more spectacle. But also that a lot of people will self-deport, and it makes Trump seem strong and manly and strong like bull, right? And then there's...
That kind of makes sense, yeah. I guess I could kind of see that.
What you might call the hawkish but actually professional camp, which is represented by Tom Homan. Now, I have my disagreements with Tom Homan, and I think to Kevin's point, he does not look like what Trump thinks people on TV should look like.
Yeah.
But he actually knows the job. And I think, and this is where my very slight disagreement with Megan on this is that what Trump has said in this case, it's not so much that he's backing down. He's like, I gave the right-wing theater kids their shot and they blew it. So now I'm going to put in the guy who actually knows how to do this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would do. I would have done that from the beginning. At the end of the day, you have to understand, and this is something I was listening to, once again, Richard Spencer talk about last night on his space, and you guys should go subscribe to his Substack. It's good stuff. He said something that I also thought was interesting, and he was talking with Basil, and I actually thought this was really interesting. They pointed this out regarding the antics and the spectacle that ICE is creating with these deportations. And the whole thing is, it's not real. None of it is real. People forget this. Like, what we're seeing here with ICE, these major spectacles, these videos are coming in, they're got their guns drawn, walking up to people's doors, throwing people on the sidewalk, tackling people, pepper spraying people. Like, they're bringing film crews with them. You have to understand, they are bringing the media with them to record all of it. ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, they want this to be on Twitter, okay? And so the whole point of it is to the actual lack of mass deportations, the lack of being able to actually remove 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people from the country every day. That deficit is made up by hype on Twitter. And so that's why when you look at the official numbers after an entire year, they're actually abysmal. What are they sitting at? 250,000 deportations total. And I mean, I don't really care about the self-deportations. Maybe it's 1 million, maybe it's 2 million, maybe it's more. I don't know how they quantify that. But when we talk about actual interior removals, it is like 250,000. And it's creating a lot of spectacle. And it's really good for Twitter, but it's not actually real. And people seem to forget that. What's real is what can be quantified. You know, just because you see these videos every day on the timeline doesn't mean it's real. They're taking highlights from 500 arrests and they're just replaying them over and over, but it's still only 500 arrests. It just creates the impression that they're doing mass deportations. The brutality, the violation of, you know, probably the Fourth Amendment, randomly pulling people out of cars, racially profiling people. I think all of this is meant to create a particular impression that makes up for the deficit of mass deportations. So yeah, a lot of it is obviously it's kabuki theater, it's kayfabe.
And I watched the first 20 minutes of his press conference.
It's similar to the situation with Clavicular and Sneeko and Nick Fuentes and Myron Gaines and those guys when they played Hail Hitler by Ye at that nightclub in Miami. And when you go back and look at that, I guess when you look at Twitter, what was everybody saying? Everybody was saying that, oh, this is moving the Overton window further to the right, creating these big spectacles, all this drama. It makes it feel like the culture is really changing, but maybe on some level, but it creates this impression that the cultural change is way larger than it really is. Most normal, moderate people don't actually care for that. Like I would say 80, 90% of the population don't actually think that's in good taste. But it creates the impression that this is the case because it's like, oh, everybody on Twitter is getting hyped about it and everybody's reposting it and quote tweeting it. So it's the same thing. But long term, this actually backfires institutionally because, and I pointed this out already in one of my previous videos, but the people who actually levy institutional critiques against these Jewish advocacy groups, those people get lumped in with the actual Hitler supporters who are throwing up Romans at a nightclub in Miami. So it really backfires on the people who actually want to critique and change the institutions and dismantle these kind of Jewish advocacy networks in a more constructive way that doesn't glorify Hitler at the same time. It blows up the whole operation. And that's what we're seeing here with Trump. It's theater over substance.
This morning before we started recording this, he gave a press conference. I kind of like that he did this at 7 a.m. Minnesota time. Get everybody before drive time, make all the reporters get up. And again, I got my disagreements with him, but he makes a very compelling case for his case, you know, and he's trying.
You have to understand, when you escalate, the other side escalates. This is like basic physics. Equal opposite reaction. If you escalate, the opposite side's going to escalate. I think the better approach is to try to deport people as, what's the word I'm looking for? As discreetly as possible.
He was like, I'm not here to tell you what the federal government has done prior to me being here has been perfect. Now he's throwing his own people under the bus. He's throwing the performative people under the bus, the Noams and the Millers there, because he's won Trump's favor to do this stuff. But I actually, Megan said something along the lines of, I don't think we're going to get any improvement in immigration problem or reform or policy or something like that. I think we will, because even really tough, hawkish, but professional immigration law enforcement is superior to the craptacularness that we've seen over the last month or so. And Homan's perspective is like, this is the point I've been trying to make forever, is that you can agree with all of Trump's policy ends on immigration, and I agree with a lot of them, right? I mean, like, you got to enforce federal immigration laws. The way they've been enforcing it is contrary to their own actual stated goals, because it puts their own agents in risk, in danger. It undermines public support for it. People don't like masked agents running around all over the place, kicking in doors, scaring the crap out of people, picking up 5-year-old kids, jumping on moms, picking up their kids from daycare. So the Noam Miller approach undermines good governance, even if you define good governance as very severe enforcement of immigration law. And so, like, I'll take that trade, right? I'd rather have the government be really tough on immigration enforcement, but abide by proper policy, right? About how you conduct yourself professionally, codes of conduct, which, you kept talking about. You kept talking about how this is a professional law enforcement agency. The Noam approach is like, we're going to be a militia and we're going to drop down on you, and we're going to arouse anger and rebellion from the local populations and brag about how we're being tough on them. And that's not how you deal with Americans. That's not actually how you try to achieve your policy aims. So still plenty of room to criticize the Trump administration immigration policy, but like, this is an improvement, I think.
What's maddening about this, if I can interject for just a second, is that it's not an easy to solve problem, obviously, but it's a problem in which 75% of it has a fairly straightforward, if hard to do solution, which is you get rid of the guys in the masks, you bring in the guys with the green eye shades, and you start running business records, and you make it economically more expensive.
Precisely. I mean, this is the most effective way to do it. You go at the businesses, you make it impossible for them to do banking. You don't give illegal immigrants licenses, documentation, fake IDs, driver's licenses, or a driver's license, a CDL. Like, you have to make it functionally impossible for them to exist and survive economically. And then they will start to self-deport en masse. I mean, what is it, a 1 or 2 day drive across the border? It's not that far. You can just drive right across. Most of these people live in LA. They live in LA, they live in Arizona, they live in the Southwest. That's a 4, 5, 6 hour drive to Mexico. I mean, to me, it's like, if you really wanted to solve this problem, you'd go after the people employing them. The construction companies, it's always somebody on this fucking street. Always people fucking speeding down here. I hate this. Man, I hate this city. Sorry. But if you really wanted to solve this problem, it would require a top-down institutional and business restriction. It would require restriction on these various businesses and sectors where most of the illegal immigrants are employed. And after that, you would start really seeing these people leave the country in mass, because it wouldn't be economically viable for them to stay here. You got to start throwing the people who employ them in prison as well. And even if you take an economic hit, it is what it is. You'd rather have a country where citizenship means something and actually have a meaningful national identity, and a sovereign country where law actually matters and people come in legally. And, Americans have decent jobs, but yeah, it's a lot of bark and not a lot of bite.
To hire illegal immigrants than the economic benefits of hiring illegal immigrants.
Yep.
And you'll know they're serious about this the first time some white Republican voting general contractor in Harris County, Texas, goes to prison for 15 years for hiring 200 illegal aliens in his construction crews. Or the first
or when
time
Congress passes E-Verify, right? I mean, E-Verify is the test.
Some guy who owns a whole bunch of inexpensive roadside hotels in Missouri goes to jail for all the illegal immigrants he hires. It's not exclusively an economic problem. The economic lure for illegal immigration is strong, but it's only probably, 75% of the problem. But if you do what you need to do to make it essentially impossible to work as an illegal immigrant, you don't solve the entire problem. You've still got transnational crime organizations and people who are involved in drug trafficking and human trafficking and other things like that. But you solve a big, big piece of it. And once you've got that 75% solved, then you can take the resources you still have and concentrate on that much smaller, 20% piece. I know that leaves 25% over, but I'm assuming that 5% never gets solved because it's a government problem.
Can I read to you? I want to read you a section of a piece that we.
That's probably one of the most sensible things I've heard about ICE in like the past 2 weeks. Thankfully, there are people in this world who still think. Thank God. It is so refreshing to hear.
Published actually at the Weekly Standard a decade ago on sanctuary cities. And I want to read it to you because I think it's still the very best
make me die.
description of the fight over sanctuary cities that I have read. And after the piece ran, I think I may have mentioned this piece before here. It was written by my colleague, Tony Messia. I got an email from a very hawkish on immigration senator saying it was the best piece that he had read about immigration, and a very open borders think tanker who said it was the best piece on immigration he had read. This was before Kevin's piece, where Kevin went out and explored some of these same issues earlier this year. We'll post both of those in the show notes, but I just want to read this. It's a little bit of a chunk of this piece. Many of the most pressing crimes in the United States, terrorism, gangs, and drugs, are fought in tandem by federal and local law enforcement. On immigration, counties and states nationwide are increasingly backing away from what has traditionally been their part of the bargain. Some cities are calling themselves sanctuaries in opposition to the policies of the Trump administration, but more and more, even those that don't use the moniker are directing their police not to cooperate with ICE. This was published in 2017. Contrary to the way they're portrayed by critics, sanctuary cities are not rogue jurisdictions brazenly flouting federal law. Instead, in an approach blessed by federal judges, they are exercising policy judgments about whether their jailers will hang on to prisoners so ICE can collect them or even communicate with ICE at all. They have decided that their residents are best served by building trust with local police and keeping immigrant families intact. With no sign of comprehensive immigration reform coming out of Washington, sanctuary cities are taking matters into their own hands and slowing down deportations. Making federal law enforcement less efficient has consequences, though. It means fewer criminals are deported to their home countries. It places ICE officers in riskier situations because they have to encounter criminals at their houses instead of collecting them from jails, and it distorts who stays in the country and who goes. That's because when tracking illegal immigrants with criminal records, ICE officers often encounter that person's relatives and friends who've done nothing wrong but come to America illegally, and they often are the ones who wind up being deported instead. Is that, to your understanding, Kevin, an accurate description of the debate? Do you challenge any part of what I've just said? And if so, part of what we saw this week after Tom Homan was named was Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey on the left. And there have been these conversations between Trump administration officials and local and state officials in Minneapolis where people come out afterwards and say, hey, we're making progress. These are good conversations, but we still disagree about these things. And Jacob Frey, who I would say has a flair for the dramatic, likes to poke and prod, likes to drop the F-bomb, said after his conversation with Tom Homan, no way.
Just for the record, I think that guy is so obnoxious. This Jacob Frey character, holy. This guy is just slimy. The pandering, this soy boy, tough guy act he's got going on, this slimy, haughty attitude, this rebellious thing. Fuck Trump, get the fuck out of our city. It's like, oh my God, how do people tolerate it? I can't. I think it's so embarrassing. The fake melodrama on TV. Yeah, like Trump is really messing up our city and this is really inappropriate and I can't believe he's doing this, and our city was so much better before he got here and we can deal with our own. It's just like, shut the fuck up, bro. He makes my skin crawl.
Going to cooperate with federal federal immigration officials. And the Trump administration has suggested that if Minneapolis, Minnesota more broadly, would do so, they might draw down. Is that sort of the crux of the problem here?
Well, I don't think it's the crux of the problem here. I think it's a problem more generally. I mean, he also asked for their voting records and stuff. He's a weird dude. But so the sanctuary cities thing is, as a constitutional matter, I think pretty straightforward that states have the powers to do this and cities have the power to do this. They can't be commandeered, as the legal language puts it, by the federal government. Insofar as it relates to people who are incarcerated, I think it's a bad policy. I think that for people who've been convicted of crimes, there should be a pretty strong presumption of their deportation if they're illegal immigrants after that. Now, if a city is saying we're not going to cooperate when it comes to our public school records or our health and human services or things like that, we're not going to share those records. We're not going to give federal immigration personnel access to those facilities or records or whatever. I think that's probably a more defensible policy in some ways. I think that the policy of not deporting people who are both illegally present in the United States and convicted of crimes is just foolish. I mean, if you're going to deport people, that's where you start, and that seems. And they're also there. It's convenient. You know, you don't have to go hunt them down because they are in a jail cell somewhere, and in the process of discharging them, it's a fairly straightforward logistical thing to remove them from the country. I understand there's some administrative problems with that need to be resolved, but that's a relatively straightforward management task. So it's a constitutional policy, but I think it's bad policy. But the problem, particularly in Minneapolis, isn't that it's a sanctuary city. There are lots of sanctuary cities and jurisdictions around the country, including in some red states. There's some in Texas and places like that. And the problem in Minneapolis is that we've just sent people in to do something that's not their job. And I keep coming back to this point that dealing with illegal immigration is partly a matter of getting control of the border. But then after that, for dealing with the illegals who are present in the United States, it's a difficult management problem. It's a problem for accountants and lawyers and judges and people like that. And this, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump version of, well, let's just scare people into doing what we want them to do so that we don't have to do the hard part of public administration is just absolutely cowardly. And it's also bad politics, I think, ultimately. So you've got an executive branch, and the executive branch's job is to execute the laws of the United States. That means doing this hard management stuff, of figuring out how to go about dealing with a problem that's now millions upon millions of people and prioritizing that. It's not a super sexy thing to do. It's not a lot of juice politically in doing it the right way. But it's just, that is the way it needs to be done and ultimately has to be done. And the idea that we're just going to use these theatrical tactics and armed masked histrionics to get people to deport themselves out of the country is, I think, morally questionable, but I also think it's practically questionable. If you're a very poor person from Guatemala who's come to the United States and you're working illegally as a hotel maid somewhere, and you've got children who are dependent on you, you're not going to see what's going on in Minneapolis and go, well, hell, I guess I'll just uproot my life and quit my job and somehow get myself back to Guatemala with my kids and face goodness knows what prospects there. I don't think it's likely to work. It might work in some, edge cases. You've got some people who are on both sides of the border pretty regularly, particularly in places like Arizona and South Texas, who may say, okay, well, it's looking like my prospects are better on the Piedras Negras side of the border than they are on the Eagle Pass side of the border. But for the millions upon millions of people that are here illegally, the idea that we're going to scare them into quitting their jobs, leaving their homes, uprooting their families, and going back to countries that they might not have been to for 20 or 30 or 40 years, it's nonsense.
Yeah, and I want to echo, too, that, sending the Border Patrol, Peter Moskos has been saying this. He's a former cop. He's a sociologist. He teaches at John Jay. That one thing that you just see in this, right, is that this is not their job. Border Patrol doesn't know how to do urban policing, and they're really bad at it. And
they're not great at being a Border Patrol.
Well, fair enough.
Right.
But they're definitely not good at being urban cops. And, Moskos and others, I had Bill Bratton on my Washington Post podcast a couple.
Yeah, I just don't get the whole idea. Like, you're going to scare... It never made sense. Like, how do you expect to scare tens of millions of people who are in either Democrat city strongholds where all the local officials, the state government, the mayor, they are completely willing and able to obstruct the federal government. But not only that, they are these immigrant enclaves that are self-functioning, that are self-reliant, where the person who does your taxes speaks Spanish, the person who owns the the laundromat is Hispanic, is an illegal alien. The person who, the person who teaches your children might be an illegal alien. The person who, all these they're self-functioning, self-reliant ecosystems where you can basically live in an entire neighborhood your whole life and never have to learn English because everybody around you speaks Spanish. The mechanic is an illegal immigrant. Everybody's an illegal immigrant. And you can basically spend your entire life in these ecosystems and be totally fine. And to leave that comfort and to leave that continuity, to embark on this dangerous trip across the border to go from I don't know, Los Angeles to Guatemala or some other country in Central America or Central Mexico, is completely insane. It's just the most ridiculous idea ever. You're just going to scare those people into leaving? Okay. Yeah, right. He's totally correct. They have their own self-sustaining ecosystems. And the weather is better. And they make more money. And it's just way better. It's just that whole idea is ridiculous. That's why I never bought into this idea that like there's been 2 million deportations. I'm extremely reluctant to buy into that. They just have it too good here.
Weeks ago, he is the legendary New York City police commissioner who turned around the NYPD in the early 90s. And I had him on with Ken Corey, who is also a high-ranking former NYPD official, has just been announced. He is now the executive director of the Policing Leadership Academy at the University of Chicago, which is one of the coolest.
We're talking about entire neighborhoods, entire cities, regions that are just comprised of different immigrant enclaves. It's going to be incredibly difficult to break up those networks. Incredibly difficult. So the idea that was ever going to work, you're going to scatter these people around without dismantling the networks, it's completely asinine. They've had decades to develop them.
Crime fighting programs in the country where they're training district commanders to actually use data, police better. And, Bratton sort of gently said, look, would I have refused to let a doctor go to treat Renee Good after she was shot? Probably not. And also that the administration had undermined its own credibility by going out immediately and saying, hey, this is like domestic terrorism, rather than saying, we're going to wait and see where there's going to be an investigation. And I think that the lack of experience with these kinds of problems has shown up over and over again. These encounters are so much more violent than normal policing. And yes, there's a lot of protests, but there were a lot of protests in 2020, and we did not see protesters killed the way we are seeing people killed now. And, Peter Moscow has said, look, you've got a lot of guys in that video. You take them down. You get one on each arm. It's really hard to subdue someone who's resisting. But this is not a situation where you need to shoot someone, right? This is a situation where urban cops know how to do this, and the Border Patrol
hundreds
clearly
of times
doesn't.
a day. Yeah.
Yeah.
People get disarmed all the time, without getting shot after being disarmed.
And so the fact that they are trying to do the wrong job with the wrong people is really contributing to this.
But Steve, the question you asked Kevin, I've mentioned this a million times. I long had a policy of not writing about interest rates or monetary policy because it's one of the few areas where I have people I really respect and whose intellect and expertise I admire on completely different sides of the question, and it freaks me out. And I'm like Burden's ass because I cannot decide who's right. And I go back and forth on this question. I have friends, Dan McLaughlin, Charlie Cook over at NR, who are talking about how what Minnesota is doing is nullification and it's incredibly dangerous and it is the undermining of national sovereignty. And I really respect those guys, and I don't think they're just being partisan on this or anything like that. And at the same time, I know people who take.
I mean, my whole position on the illegal immigrant question has always just been it undermines national sovereignty. They shouldn't be here, and they shouldn't have jobs that Americans otherwise would have. It's that simple. I don't care if they benefit the economy. I don't care if they've been here for 25 or 30 years. None of that really matters to me. It is degrading our society. It is degrading the social fabric. It is degrading the meaning of citizenship. It is degrading the function of the law. It is undermining the law. And it is in turn also dividing our country and radicalizing people. It's becoming an incredibly divisive issue. And all of this is happening with people who shouldn't even be here to begin with. So for me, it's just basic political and national security reason, or rather, it's basic political and I guess ideological reasons. I mean, economic too, but this idea that like this is about national security, people point to that and it's like that's not really the main problem. People say, well, a lot of them are criminals and rapists and so on and so forth. Yeah, obviously, but if you look at the actual statistics, they don't commit crime as much as the native population. That's just true. The majority of them are not committing crimes because they don't want to get deported. But that really to me is immaterial. Obviously, it's I mean, it's just self-evident. To me, it just goes without saying you would deport people who are foreign nationals who are also committing crimes. That's just like a given. But to me, that's not even the bulk of them. That's what, 5-10% of the illegals living here? The 80-90% that are really the major problem are parents, are, day workers, and they have to be deported, in my opinion. They need to go, whether or not they've committed a crime. It's just like it's just basic common sense. It's basic political reasoning about preserving our republic and keeping our society united by keeping us from being divided over this issue. It's just like, for me, it's just the reasons are a lot more basic. It really has little to do with this whole like economic angle. That's a part of it, but it has less to do with that. It even has less to do with national security and more to do with just basic political reasoning. They should not be here. They are not citizens. Like, straight up. To me, it's that simple.
The view that is sort of as Kevin articulated,
they should not be on our public services. It's really just a matter of principle for me.
That what Minnesota is doing is, you can disagree with the optics of it and the performative nature of it and not like what these protesters are doing with their whistles and all of that, and you can concede that there are outside agitators, but at the end of the day, Minnesota is within its constitutional rights and legal rights to do what it's doing. And I cannot for the life of me make up my mind on the merits of these questions. I go back into, there are days I'm on one side of it and there are days I'm on the other side of it. On the politics of it.
I guess it's just more a respect thing, really what it comes down to. It's just about respect, dude. Like, damn. Like, do we respect the law? Do we respect citizenship? Do we respect our republic? Do we respect order? Do we respect taxpayers? Like, do we respect ourselves as a country? Literally, that's it. Like, I'm trying to find the words to articulate it, but that's what it comes down to. Fucking respect. And letting 40 million people come into this country and leech off of us. Let me not even say leech. Letting 40 million people come here who basically function as an underclass, and then they get to have children, and their children automatically get citizenship when their parents came in illegally. And then many of them are on welfare. Many of them are in our public education system and competing for resources with lower class American citizens. It's just about basic respect. Like, really? 30, 40 million people who are just coming in here and posting up and they're not citizens. To me, it's just like, just that basic idea is wild to me.
I think my friends, like Charlie and those guys, I think they miss a point, which is this thing I keep harping on about what the Trump administration is doing is so pretextual, right? And that the federal government has the colorable argument on it. It has the argument on its side that it is the right and obligation to faithfully execute federal immigration laws. But when it does so in a way deliberately designed to strike fear into people, that endangers federal law enforcement agents, that is performative and theatrical, and is designed to arouse these kinds of responses from places like Minnesota, it doesn't help their case, right? I mean, it's sort of like, yes, the federal government, the executive branch has the right to do all sorts of things with war powers and all that kind of stuff, but it can't consistently lie about why it's doing things, that it's fighting a drug war or whatever, and then say, oh, it was really always about taking the oil. And you can't give Stephen Miller carte blanche, and Corey Lewandowski of all people, dear God, carte blanche to like make these arguments and then fall back on the argument. Well, the president is faithfully executing the laws. He's executing the laws. I don't buy the faithfully part, and I really struggle with this, and it doesn't help that Tim Walz is kind of a moron. It doesn't help that Jacob Fry is a performative jackass.
Right.
It doesn't help, Tim Walz in this interview, he's talking about how what's going on in Minnesota might...
I don't know what it is about that state, but everybody up there is just terrible. I mean, they're just horrible all around. Fry, Walz, Ilhan Omar, Omar Fateh. By the way, I've talked about this in a previous video, but it's worth restating. Omar Fateh, the person who ran against Jacob Fry to win the mayorship in Minneapolis last year, do you guys want to know the reason why he lost? Because he was close. He was only within a few points of beating Jacob Fry to become the mayor of Minneapolis. Do you guys know why that guy lost? Because he was a part of the wrong Somalian clan. That's literally why he lost. I shit you not. You can look this up. Omar Fateh is from Virginia. He's from Falls Church, Virginia. That's where he went to high school. He was born in Washington, D.C. He was raised in that area, in the DMV area. He went to school in Falls Church, Virginia. And then he decided he wanted to become a mayor. He wanted to get involved in politics. And rather than staying in his local municipality, rather than staying in the DMV metro area, he goes all the way across the country, halfway across the country, moves to Minnesota, gets involved in local politics in Minneapolis, and then runs to become the mayor. Mind you, he could have chosen 49 other states. Why do you think he chose Minneapolis? Because he is a Somalian. He was a Somalian whose parents immigrated to D.C. He was born there when he was a kid. He was raised in the DMV area as this first generation, or I guess second generation technically, second generation Somalian American. He moves halfway across the country to kickstart his political career, and he moves to a city that has the highest concentration of Somalians in the entire country. And he thinks that he can just get a free ticket to political power by running in a state, in a city that has people who happen to share his ethnicity. And it backfired on him because he was a part of, I believe, the Hawiti clan. And the Hawiti clan and the Darude clan are the two biggest clans in Minneapolis. He was a part of the wrong clan. And the opposite clan, I believe it was the Darude clan, voted for Jacob Fry. And just let that sink in. This guy is not from Minneapolis. He's not from Minnesota. And he tried to basically, I don't know what the right phrase is here, but he tried to leverage his ethnicity as a Somalian to get political power in this country. That's literally what he did. I mean, can you think of anything just more, oh my God, just more bizarre than that? To me, that's just bizarre. I can't respect that at all. And it backfired on him. Crazy, but it's worth restating because it's like, what is that? Like, I can't think of anything more un-American than that. Trying to play into this collective identity. And you're hanging out with a bunch of Somalians who are not native to this country, or rather, they're not from America. You know, they're immigrants or, illegal immigrants, whatever. Some of them are citizens, I'm sure, but they just got here, okay? They're immigrants or they're second geners, okay? They haven't been here long. And to just move across the country, halfway across the country to leverage that, I don't know. Something about that doesn't sit right with me. To me, being loyal to your state, loyal to where you're from, loyal to your county, or loyal to your whatever is more honorable than doing what he did. But, this is what everybody does now. So I can't really blame him for it, but it doesn't sit right with me.
Destroy the country.
Like, there's just something off with all those people, that whole state, that whole city. It's just bizarro world.
Is this Fort Sumter? I was like, really? You want to be the governor responsible for Fort Sumter? Is that where you want to be in this analogy? And so I keep coming back to this phrase. I use it all the time on CNN. Everyone looks at me like I'm weird. I know Kevin and Megan know exactly what I'm getting at. There's a real Baptist.
I even know what words you're going to use.
It's a real Baptist and bootleggers problem, where the lefties benefit from heightening the tensions and getting their people on side and making Preddy into more of a martyr than he is. I think he was completely unjustifiably killed.
He's not a martyr in the least bit, and just not at all, not even close. Like I said, I think his murder was unjustified, but that guy is not a martyr. I don't care what anybody says.
And he does not need to be slandered by anybody. But you have these people turning him into.
It's just the lionizing of these people is insane to me. It's just so insane. Our country is going crazy. The psychosis is insane. I don't get it. It's bizarre.
Trying to beatifying him because it helps their cause, and at the same time you have the performative people benefiting from saying he's a domestic terrorist, when the reality is he was a pretty.
Like I said at the beginning of the video, this mutual escalation only benefits the most extreme and radical elements of either side until they meet at a summit and then start wiping each other out. And then innocent people get dragged into that conflict. Innocent, moderate, people get dragged into this far left, far right death spiral.
I think he behaved sort of irresponsibly, but
did.
Totally legally. And
I don't know about totally legally, but he definitely behaved irresponsibly.
In no way did he deserve to be executed. But like making nuanced arguments somewhere in the middle just enrages people on both sides.
It does. I've noticed, and that's a good thing. That is a good sign. That is a very good sign. And that's something I've been struggling with. I want to. There's a temptation in politics, and you have to really fight it and learn to resist it. But there is a temptation to just go full tilt, to just go full conspiracy theory. America's dying. The West is dying. They're out to get you. The government hates you. The Jews run everything. There's that temptation. Illegal immigrants are all rapists and invaders. And there is that temptation to just go full tilt, inflammatory rhetoric 24/7, reinforce all of people's biases. There is that pressure. There is that temptation. It is seductive. And you can really grow doing that. There is an ecosystem for that now. There is a community for that now. There is monetary incentives to do that, to just dunk on black people all the time, dunk on Muslims, dunk on Jews. Like, there is that incentive structure. It exists, and you have to fight it 24/7. I forgot where I was going with this. What did he say again? Let me hear what he said one more time.
Somewhere in the middle?
Right. Yeah, he was talking about staying in the middle. The thing is, when you take the path that I take, people will hate you, like straight up. Like, people will hate you, bro, for saying things that should be rather obvious. It's like the right is saying he's a domestic terrorist, he deserved to be killed, good riddance, filthy leftist scum. And that's unhinged. And the left is saying this guy's a martyr, they're trying to kill us, ICE is a domestic terrorist organization. I also think that's unhinged. The moderate position is he was behaving like an idiot, this guy's a jackass, but he didn't deserve to lose his life. Like, that is a sane, moderate position that I think most people would agree with. And that's the position I'm taking. But of course, people want to converge on you and say, from the right, you're a cuck. Why are you defending this guy? Fuck that guy. He deserved to die. And the left is saying, why are you defending ICE? He's a martyr. He didn't deserve to die. He did nothing wrong. He's a constitutional observer. And it's like, yeah, you guys are just captured by talking points. You guys are captured by personal animosity. And once you are captured by hatred or animated by animosity, you can't think clearly. And so you have to really resist that pressure. It's tough, man, but it's worth doing.
Is Minnesota doing the right thing or not? Question.
Yeah, I think you saw this. Remember Kyle Rittenhouse?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this kid who, like a jackass, decides that he is going to single-handedly police the Minnesota riots by carrying a gun.
This was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, back in 2020. Yeah.
Right. And he takes a rifle to a riot, and he is not trained in law enforcement tactics. And this was a bad idea. And he clearly had a cowboy fantasy about, policing the frontier. And that did not end well.
I was thinking about this the other day, and my grandfather told me this. And when I heard it, I thought it was a bit nihilistic, a bit pessimistic. But upon further examination, I actually think he was onto something. He said the only difference between a hero and an idiot is that heroes get lucky. And I'm like, he might have a point. It's like he might have a point. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you there? Like, what are you doing? Why are you at this Black Lives Matter radical leftist protester as like this vigilante Batman figure with the fucking rifle on you, and you're gonna like single-handedly, shepherd the audience towards discipline, and you're gonna be the one guy there making sure that you're enforcing law and order. It's just complete insanity. People get drunk. People get out of their body on this stuff, man. Seriously. People get out of their body when it comes to politics. It's crazy. You got to fight it. You just got to fight it. You got to be sane.
Because he got into...
I really do think, like, the other thing that is also true is that if you are a radical on either side, that is usually indicative of some kind of mental illness or some kind of personality disorder. To be a radical leftist or a radical right-winger, that's usually indicative of some psychological or personality idiosyncrasy or illness that lends itself to extreme thinking and extreme behavior. So it's probably a good sign if you're a moderate or have a moderate disposition, rather.
My read of the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, he ultimately killed people with the gun because they attacked him. And my ultimate read of that situation was that he justifiably feared for his life, and that the people who were chasing him also probably justifiably thought that he was a threat, and that was just a tragic situation, but that he should not have been convicted.
Anytime you charge at somebody with a weapon, you're asking to be killed. I mean, I don't know what else to say. If you charge at somebody who is armed with a gun and they're not provoking you actively, and I mean, maybe Rittenhouse was provoking people. I don't remember. Such a long time ago. But if you charge at somebody with a gun unprovoked, yeah, you're gonna get smoked. Probably. You shouldn't do that.
He was not convicted of murder. But it was worth saying, like, 17-year-old kids should not be dragging guns and trying to be vigilantes in riots, right? And you can then go back and like, well, the police should have been doing a better job. It doesn't matter. He shouldn't have done that. It was really dumb. But if you contrast the attitude of
and it's so obvious that that's true. Like, it's so obvious that a 17-year-old kid should not be at a protest drunk on vigilantism, thinking he's Bruce Wayne or something like that. This guy thinks he's Batman with a assault rifle or an AR-15, driving across state lines to watch over or oversee a protest and defend private property. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And that's obviously like that's like self-evidently the wise and correct opinion to have, obviously. But if you say that this, like I said, radical right, radical left, never-ending escalation ladder, the people who are in that headspace are going to project onto you and say that you're somehow wrong for having a sane opinion.
conservatives and the left on Kyle Rittenhouse versus Alex Preddy, it is incredibly instructive, right? The left was convinced that the act of carrying that gun meant that he basically sacrificed any other rights he had after that, and that he could not possibly have shot in self-defense. And that because we also know he's a bad person because he's MAGA, that he therefore like obviously had bad motives, and we can know that merely by who he was.
That's retarded.
Right? And the right was like, he was a hero. He went in and like he was defending himself
retarded.
against the forces of barbarity.
Yeah, if you think that guy's a hero, you're just retarded. You need to be slapped.
And those positions are now exactly reversed. The fact that Alex,
which is how you know none of it is based in reality or based in principle. Nobody's looking at the precise details of either case and trying to identify the overlap in them. It's just he's our guy, so he's in the right, or he's our guy and he's in. It's either he's our guy and he's in the right, or he's not our guy and he's in the wrong. There's no thinking past that, even if these two things are identical.
As far as the administration is concerned, and a lot of MAGA people, the fact that he had a gun and may or may not have kicked the taillight out of an ICE car, 10 days before, therefore means that anything that was done to him is fine, because he is not the sort of person who is allowed to carry a gun or do anything or defend himself, because he's bad, because he's a protester and he's against the righteous forces of order and law and American border integrity. And the left is like, well, yeah, sure, of course, he walked into...
I mean, once you pull yourself out of the vortex, you can see it more clearly. It's just so many contradictions. It's insane.
To a protest with a gun, like, that's his Second Amendment right, which it is, to be clear, very much.
But stupid.
And that the fact that he kicked the taillight out is irrelevant, which I think to the question of his shooting is in fact irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter what he did 10 days before. But everyone's trying to turn this into saints and sinners, rather than saying, like, on the one hand, please do not bring your weapon to an anti-ICE action. It's just like, it raises the temperature on things. It is, in fact, does seem possible to me at this juncture that what happened is they took the Sig Sauer off of him. And I gather, although Kevin, you certainly would know better than me, that this is a gun that has an accidental discharge problem, or allegedly has an accidental.
I mean, it's not like the ICE officers who were apprehending him saw what brand and make and model of gun he had. There's no way they would have known that. It was just all happening way too fast. So that whole point is kind of irrelevant.
Discharge problem, and that it may have accidentally discharged, which then convinced people who had just heard the word gun shouted, that this guy was a threat. We'll find out more.
Yeah,
in
it
the
looks like
investigation.
the New York Times analysis has pretty well conclusively demonstrated, I think, that the gun did not go off, that it was. That
Okay,
gun was
well,
never
then
fired.
I take that back. But
Which immediately made a
please-
long piece I had written completely irrelevant an hour after it
Oh,
went
dear.
up.
But please do
Which,
not bring guns to protests. And also, I don't care that is totally irrelevant to this question, because that did not in any way give ICE the right to shoot him. It's relevant only to the extent that there may have been a tragic situation where a bunch of people heard gun and misunderstood what that meant. But that just
Finally, somebody who is sane. Like, it's so nice to hear sane people talk about these things. It is so nice. Thank God, there's still hope.
just goes back to the urban policing problem, because as Peter Moskos just said on Twitter yesterday, like, this happens all the time. You're wrestling with a guy, someone shouts gun and like takes the gun, and then we don't shoot him, right? Like, this is actually, that it's not really an excuse, but it probably did make things worse, and it would have been wiser if he had not brought the gun. But, we cannot have a situation where, unless our citizenry behaves with maximum wisdom all the time, they get executed.
Yeah. You were just making me think. I used to live in this very small town in rural Colorado where there was a lot of elk hunting. It was a big elk hunting mecca. And so you would see people walking down the streets with rifles over their shoulders just all the time, because there was sort of one restaurant in town where you could have breakfast, and it opened at 7 a.m, and there was a bar in it, of course, because you could get a drink at 7 a.m. too. And they essentially had a coat check for rifles when you would go in, because you're not allowed to have a firearm in a place that serves alcohol. And so there are completely organic, normal ways for people to develop protocols for being responsible with firearms, even in a town where you'll see people walking down the street at 8 o'clock in the morning during normal business hours with great big rifles over their shoulders. But if you are going to be Kyle Rittenhouse and insert yourself into a problem, yeah, that's not good gun ownership. The Preddy thing bothers me a little bit, because I've been through a couple of different concealed.
I mean, it's one. Look, I'm gonna just be real. It's one thing to carry around a rifle or pistol or something like that with you when you live in a rural area and you don't see a lot of people, and I guess that's just the culture there. And it's a whole different can of worms to be walking around with a pistol, or even worse, some kind of rifle, in an urban area that is densely populated. And it's just like, people who carry their guns around with them, especially open carry, like, it just makes you act different. People think that they're invincible when they have a gun, and it just makes you do shit that you wouldn't do otherwise. It's just not good to just be walking around with a gun on you all the time. I get it. Maybe, uh, I mean, look, if you live in a dangerous area, or you live in a rural area or something like that, maybe I could see needing it, carrying it around. But like, for the day-to-day average person, like, what are you really doing? You live in the suburbs. Why are you walking around with a handgun? I don't know. I think it's totally unnecessary. You have the right, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily good to be walking around with that. Like, you have the right to call your boss a slur, but you probably shouldn't do that.
Carry permit classes, because I've had permits in a few different states. And it's not a legal obligation that you avoid places like that in most places, although some places it is. But one of the things they really stress is that you take on certain responsibilities when you're carrying a firearm. And one of those responsibilities is to keep yourself out of situations where you're likely to be in a confrontation like that. I think he certainly was being irresponsible by taking that firearm into that situation. Nice gun, by the way. He had a really kind of a pretty high-end gun. But yeah, I completely concur, of course, that this is no reason to shoot him, particularly after he's been disarmed. He had a gun thing.
I mean, they shot him in the back. He didn't pose any bodily danger to anybody there. And there was 9 other guys. There's just no reason for it. I don't know what to say. There's just no reason for that. And anybody who's trying to justify it, I mean, you can say with a probably high degree of certainty that person is just lost in the sauce. I don't know what to say. They're just lost in the sauce.
Is an argument if he has a gun, Here's where paying attention to grammar really matters. Has a gun is a whole different thing from had a gun. He had a gun before they shot him. He did not have a gun when they shot him.
Yeah, I need to move us on because I want to get to some brief discussion of what's happening abroad. We are going to come back to a question that I wanted to pose to this group. We will reconvene. Megan had a very interesting article about the use of fascist or fascism to describe what we're seeing, and argued that it was counterproductive.
I think it's actually pretty applicable at this point. I mean, I said this in the beginning. I think it's pretty applicable.
This is not helping. The Dispatch had an editorial this week in which we use authoritarian. It's worth actually getting into the best way to talk about this, but we're not going to talk about that.
I mean, they're using... At a certain point, you got to just be willing to use the word. Like, they're using fascist aesthetics. When the Secretary of Homeland Security and DHS is saying remigration, America after 100 million deportations, when the Secretary of Homeland Security is standing behind a podium that says, one of ours, all of yours, which is a Nazi slogan. I mean, what else are we supposed to make of it? I don't even get what we're doing here. They're playing around with these fascist themes and fascist aesthetics, some more than others. For example, Tucker Carlson, who just fully leans into it. I mean, that's what this is. That's what this is headed towards. I really don't know what else to say.
Today,
it has all the same contours. I know we're reluctant to use that word because there's kind of baggage associated with it. It's about, the Nazis and this Holocaust and these kinds of ultra-nationalist wars of imperialism, but they're using it's many of the same sentiments. Proto-fascist, semi-fascist, quasi-fascist, whatever, but there's obviously elements of fascism here that need to be discussed so people understand the severity of what we're living through. To kind of just kick it down the road and not use it at all, I don't think that helps anybody.
I mention it here because then it obligates us to come back to that discussion when we reconvene this group. I do want to
should write a book about fascism.
Yeah,
it's a good idea.
I have no opinions about fascism.
It's a good idea. I do want to spend a moment about what we're seeing overseas, because in some respects, I think that may be of all of the insanity and chaos and disorder that we've seen over the past several weeks, it seems to me that what we're seeing overseas may end up mattering more even than the craziness that we've seen at home, whether you're talking about the apprehension and detention of Nicolas Maduro, whether you're talking about the strikes in Syria and Nigeria, whether you're talking about threats from the president to potentially use kinetic force in places like Colombia, Cuba, and it must be said, Greenland, which is part of Denmark, NATO ally. He's pulled back. But I want to start with Iran. If you're following the news, there are credible estimates of the extent of the massacre perpetrated by the Iranian regime that range from 5,000 to more than 30,000 people.
That's a major estimate. I don't know. How are you ballparking those numbers? 5,000 to 30,000? How exactly are you ballparking those numbers? Can somebody please tell me? How? That's a wild range. That's a huge range. 25,000 potential deaths in being ballparked here, or a range of 25,000. That's insane. I don't really buy that. I don't know how they're getting that information, especially in Iran, which is like isn't like a complete state of shutdown. I don't know.
Over the past month, and Joan, I'm wondering if you can help put that in context. We don't know. The Iranian regime has, I think, acknowledged up to 4,000 people.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
Have been killed, and 10% of those they claim are Iranian government officials. But credible estimates beyond those estimates and the sort of lower level ones from the United Nations suggest that this is an unbelievable mass slaughter in Iran. How does that sort of stack up to other kinds of slaughters that we've seen over the past 30 or 40 years? And do you expect that the United States will make good? We are now positioning more assets in the region,
fleets
behind President Trump's threats from a few weeks ago to actually do something, to take kinetic action. Do you expect that?
So, the one thing you see a lot of people do is say that this is more civilian deaths than, in the entire Gaza conflict over the last 2-3 years.
That's ridiculous.
Some pro-Palestinian people object to that. Some on the merits for good faith reasons, some because they just lie. But the important distinction is, if you're going to do that distinction, is that Iran's not a war zone, right? Like, a lot of civilians die in very compact urban war zones. This is a campaign of execution. This is, there were some people in street fighting that were killed because it was street fighting, but a lot of this is going into people's homes, arresting them, executing, torturing them for a bit, find out where their friends are, and then executing them. It is not genocidal in any sort of UN international law textbook kind of way, but the intent of it, in terms of taking people who are simply a category of people who are not armed, who are not militarily resisting you, and murdering them, is on a moral level closer to that kind of thing than anything that the Israelis were doing.
Is that so?
Ken Pollack, my friend, who's now the vice president for policy at the Middle East Institute, used to be an AEI scholar. He says that whenever you hear the regime estimates from Iran about how many people they killed, you should multiply it by 3 or 4 as a rule of thumb. Could be a little bit more, might be a little bit less, but that's about the range. And so what this regime is unapologetically doing is simply murdering people who don't want to live under this regime anymore. And to get a full, I would say the Dispatch and the Daily Mail are different public.
I mean, none of us really know what's going on over there, so I'm kind of skeptical.
In
I'm kind of skeptical to believe any of this. I'll be real.
many respects, but the Daily Mail is great about showing the lifestyles of the children of the leadership of the Iranian regime. And they're in places like Monaco. They're on, yachts with, a dozen escorts and, hooker and cocaine kind of vibes all over the place. While these people, these theocratic authoritarians are murdering their own people at home. On terms of what Trump did, I said this last week, I think, on The Remnant, but if you're measuring things about national interest and America first and all that kind of stuff, Trump's posture towards Greenland, which, remember, that was the controversy a week ago, was worse than what he's doing with Iran. But if you're doing it purely on a moral calculus, purely on a sort of good versus evil kind of thing, encouraging these movements to continue resisting and rising up and seize the institutions, help is on the way, and then not showing up, having the cavalry not show up, I think morally is worse. And I'm glad that Trump is sending the armada there. I hope he makes some progress out of it. But he did not, in fact, he blinked, right? He said, if they start killing their own people, we're going to do something. He couldn't do it because most of our forces our usable forces were in the Caribbean. Our quote unquote allies in Qatar and elsewhere wouldn't let us use their bases to launch flights from. And then the media got distracted with the Minneapolis stuff. And he blinked, and Iran used that opportunity to round up and butcher thousands of people who just wanted to live in a fairly normal country. And it's shameful.
So, Kevin, we're seeing the United States ramp up. There's been reporting that Donald Trump, when asked for his military options a couple weeks ago was disappointed that he didn't have a stronger option. The reason he didn't have a stronger option is because we had many assets in the Caribbean, Central South America, and he has asked for a new set of options. He now has them as we've moved these assets into position to potentially do something more. What can the United States do? There's been discussion of some kind of attempted decapitation strike against Iranian regime assets. That seems to be in line with the kind of thing that Donald Trump would prefer to do. He talks and has talked and campaigned against these so-called forever wars for more than a decade. Doesn't seem that he'd want to be engaged in that. You've had administration officials from Marco Rubio and others suggest that that's not the way Donald Trump approaches this. But what happens if there's a decapitation strike against the supreme leader and, say, many of his top advisors? And then is it the case that the United States can then simply do nothing? That's good enough?
A related point I'd like to address real quickly is I've long been skeptical when my friends tell me we don't spend enough money on the military and that we don't have enough, ships and boats and this and that and the other thing. I just find that difficult to believe, and I can't think of too many aspects of the American government that we need to spend more money on. But if it is true that we couldn't carry out some sort of punitive retaliatory raid against a handful of elderly religious fanatics in Tehran because our boats and stuff were all busy carrying out massacres of unarmed civilians in the Caribbean and stealing oil and kidnapping the occasional head of state, that might mean that we don't have enough boats and stuff. Or it might mean that we're making some bad policy decisions. But if it really is the case that we don't have enough boats and stuff to do both of those things at the same time, then I guess we don't have enough boats and stuff. I have a hard time imagining us doing something very productive in Iran after a decapitation strike. So, the whole Bush era democracy project, we're going to build liberal democracies in places like Afghanistan and the Arab countries of the Middle East and Iraq and Syria and all that stuff.
Okay, we might actually get like an anti-interventionist take that's well thought out here. Let them cook. Let them cook.
The best case scenario for that is Japan, right? We actually did sort of build Japan. We tore it down to the...
Well, Japan is a highly organized, efficient, bureaucratic society, and it's a very technocratic society, and they've had complex bureaucratic structures for, 2,000 years. So their society is optimized for liberal democracy in ways that I don't think Iran is.
Duds and built it up as a new society and made a pretty good place out of it. But we still have troops in Japan. It was a very long, very expensive project. It was a real intergenerational national commitment of the sort that I don't think Americans really are capable of making anymore. And certainly that you don't expect the Trump administration, who thinks in 5-minute intervals between pillow ads, to be thinking in those terms. So the notion that we're going to go into Iran and help them make the transition to even something kind of like they were back before the 79 revolution, sort of a crappy but acceptable country, I think it's unlikely. Would I like to see us go in there and just have a list of people who need to get whacked and whack them? I won't lose a lot of sleep over it if that happens. But once you're involved, you're involved. And, what happens next from there, I'm not sure. For the Trump administration to do a very Barack Obama style red line, if you do this, this thing will happen. And
Which
then that thing doesn't happen, tends to undermine your credibility. But it's always Taco Tuesday at the White House. He is the Trump always chickens out is the thing. He's doing the same thing in Greenland, which I'm glad he's chickening out about Greenland. And I'm glad he's chickening out on some other things where he's got some really bad ideas. But it would be useful to either be perceived around the world as a reliable ally or a reliable enemy. Ideally, it'd be better if you were both, right? That your friends can trust you and your enemies are afraid of you. Our friends definitely don't trust us anymore, and our enemies are starting to discover there are reasons not to be that afraid of us because we can be backed down in certain kinds of situations. And we're the toughest guys in the world if you're Venezuela or Denmark, which has the population of Harris County or something like that. But when it's Iran, when it's Russia, when it's China, people who have real power, and Iran's not a real power, but it's adjacent to real powers. We
And
get
it's close to
real
having nukes,
circumspect.
which matters.
What's that?
And it's close to having nukes.
Yeah, and that's and I was talking about this the other day maybe on one of our podcasts, but there was talk of Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, coming back in and playing a leadership role. And I was saying, if I were him, whatever I did, if I made a transition to a liberal democracy or a Turkish,
I mean, honest to God, I hate to be that guy, but I feel like where we are right now, I don't want to see it happen, but I don't really think we have much of a choice. I think regime change is literally the only option that we have. Like, I don't think there is an alternative. I mean, just think about it. These people are on the cusp of getting a nuclear weapon. Okay, they could get a nuclear weapon. What are the technicalities? Some people say 3 months, some people say 9 months. And then, of course, you still have to go through the process of creating a payload and the technology that can hold a nuclear weapon, which requires, all kinds of aerodynamic testing. And it can take a long time to get a nuclear weapon. It took North Korea, I think, north of 15 years. So it's not like if they even get the raw material, the highly enriched uranium or the plutonium that is compatible with a nuclear weapon, even if they have the raw material, there's still so many other hurdles that they have to go through before they have a nuclear weapon that can be deployed and used to kill, I don't know, tens of thousands of civilians. But the problem is, like, why even have that thorn in your side in perpetuity? You know what I mean? When you can just, you know, snap that problem out of existence with a military operation. Ideally, that's the way to do it. You would be able to do a limited operation in Iran. But the whole situation is it's so explosive because if you try to assassinate the top IRGC leaders, you remove the Ayatollah of Iran, you assassinate him, you kill the president, you wipe out the top ranks of the leadership. I mean, what happens then? Some new military dictator takes over. The IRGC is like 1 million people strong, and then they have the army. Okay? So you're dealing with a heavily armed country with a strong military, a very resilient country. And if you do that, then what happens? Then they accelerate towards getting a nuclear war. Then they're launching strikes at Israel. Then they're potentially launching strikes at military bases in the Middle East, our military bases. Now Americans die. Okay, now we really have to go in. So it's like there is no way where we can control the ladder of escalation against Iran in a way that doesn't lead to a full conflict that could break out to other Middle Eastern countries and get Americans killed. There isn't really a way where we can do this without getting our hands dirty. But at the same time, if we don't get our hands dirty, we leave the Iranians to their own devices and they can accelerate towards getting a nuclear weapon, and then that forces Israel to step in. And we don't know what Israel would do. I mean, Israel would nuke that country, and then we'd really have a problem on our hands. And so the whole situation is just a powder keg, honestly. And I feel like I feel like regime change is literally the only option. Like I don't want that to be the case, but I feel like that is like a full war with them. I feel like is the only way to really um, reverse or to quell this problem. Honestly, it feels like that's the only solution. Nothing else would suffice. And if we did assassinate the Ayatollah and a military dictator took over, then of course they would accelerate towards a bomb, and then we'd have to go in and destroy them. It's just the whole situation. There is no easy solution.
Style, Ataturk kind of autocracy, but with pro-Western and pro-secular views. I'd finish up the goddamn nuclear weapons program first thing.
And it's like, ideally, a deal, a nuclear deal would be sufficient. But then that still leaves the possibility of them acquiring one secretly, and Israel and the Israel lobby and people on the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Security Council who are, influenced by Zionism and have connections to Israel, they're going to be in these secret meetings, these briefings, telling Trump or whoever the next president is, hey, well, assuming we don't go to war with Iran before Trump is gone, hey, well, we have this option, and they're definitely going to get a bomb, and we have to act now, and it's always in their ear, and it's just the whole situation it just seems like a lose-lose no matter what. And I feel like, I hate to be that guy, it feels like there is no option where we win and we don't get our hands dirty.
Because now you've got real sovereignty. And, nobody is going to give you any grief about that. So I don't, as a kind of Machiavellian, realpolitik matter, can you blame them for pursuing nuclear weapons? I want us to stop them from pursuing those nuclear weapons, but I certainly understand why they would do it. And if I were any other country in the world with the capacity to do it, I would do it. I'm shocked the Japanese haven't done it. They could probably do it in about 3 days. They've got the technological, skills, and they would be like the world's most convenient, well-designed, impressive, nuclear weapons, the kind you would want to have of your own at home.
With little kittens on them.
With kittens on them.
Funny manga
characters.
Like,
Sony nuclear weapons, right? They would be awesome. And it's a mess for which there is no good solution. I think we probably could do the decapitation strike, but as for what comes next,
I mean, it only gets worse. If you do a decapitation strike on their leader, I mean, then they definitely pursue a nuclear weapon. And an even more brutal dictator comes to power, and I mean, the whole situation could just spiral out of control. So, yeah, it's just, there's so many variables.
Marco Rubio has 30 jobs right now, so he's not going to be thinking about it. I guess we could send Corey Lewandowski.
Oof. Please.
Actually, that would be great. That's just send him.
The Iranians might be more worried about that than decapitation strikes, actually. Megan, final question on this topic to you, pulling back the camera a bit and taking a bit of a big picture look. We have seen the President Trump with this bellicose rhetoric with respect to Iran. As Kevin says, we haven't seen anything yet. I think we probably will see something in the next week or two, some kind of kinetic action. But he's talking at the same time about striking a deal and sitting down and talking through this. We saw, repeatedly the president suggest that he was at least open to using military force to take Greenland. We have seen him taking shots at longtime allies, NATO itself, about the reliability of those allies as trade partners, about NATO not paying its fair share, these things. I wonder, as Kevin points out, in each of these instances, he sort of uses maximalist rhetoric and then steps back. And his defenders will say, therefore, there are no consequences to this. And Trump, makes progress. This is the art of the deal. That's what you do. You go in, if you want to buy a house for $200,000, you go in and if somebody wants to buy your house for $200,000, you tell them it's $300,000, and then you start the negotiations from there. Is that what he's doing here?
A house for $200,000? Okay, boomer.
Hey, house for $200,000. Not everybody lives, in the fancy gilded suburbs that you live in, Kevin. There are houses for $200,000,
I don't live in the suburbs of anywhere.
There is a real problem. This was also true on the left. I spent a lot of time arguing against this on the left, and now I'm arguing against it on the right. This theory of negotiation that is ask for the stars, you'll get the moon. This is not a real negotiation theory, right? If you talk to game theorists, there is this theory where you walk in and you just like offer a ridiculous price and then you negotiate your way to something reasonable that is a better deal than you would have gotten. And this is really common in movies. And the reason it's really common in movies is that it is a negotiating strategy that you can film in a minute. And you don't have to waste like 20 minutes laying out the various ways in which you attempt to improve your what's called your BATNA, your best alternative to negotiated agreement, to expand the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. Right, our listeners are already like, boy, I really should get on regrouting the bathroom. So I'm going to stop. But
Megan just reminding us that she did complete her MBA.
Thank you. But the problem is that, because there are relatively few Americans now engage in negotiations regularly because we don't negotiate in the bazaar the way is still common in many countries where the price is not the price. We buy at retail at fixed prices, very little limited room to negotiate. And unless you are a professional negotiator in a fairly small handful of fields, you don't have a lot of experience with doing that. The closest is your house, and especially in the housing market in the last 10, 15 years, where it has been either like total bust or huge boom. Most people haven't even done that. And so because of that, people have these wild theories of how, yes, if you act like a total lunatic, you can get stuff that you wouldn't already get. And I've had so many people tell me that, no, he's a New York real estate guy. The New York real estate world, it's like wild. And, this probably makes sense there. And I'm like, fun fact, my father was a lobbyist for the heavy construction industry in New York. Now, didn't do real estate, did tunnels and bridges and so forth. But he knew his counterpart at the Building Trades Association. And the thing I know about construction in New York is this is not at all how you negotiate in New York. It's an incredibly small world. The big buildings tend to be dominated by a fairly actually small handful of players. And construction is also a very small world. All of the big contractors were members of my dad's association. And also members of the building trades. All of the unions were members of both associations, right? We're not members, but we're negotiating with both associations, had relationships with both associations. If you screw someone in that world, if you behave like a total crazy person, word gets around real fast. There is a reason he had to go to Atlantic City and gyp people who had never heard of him. And or certainly didn't know his reputation and scam people who sold him pianos and stuff, because you can't do that in New York real estate. And you also can't do this on the world stage. The madman theory of international relations works somewhat. I mean, being more unpredictable can get you gains you wouldn't otherwise have gotten, but it can also get you losses you wouldn't otherwise have gotten. The United States was standing astride an incredibly dense network of alliances, sitting atop an incredible store of soft power in terms of our commercial ties, our Hollywood, our cultural influence. And he has squandered a phenomenal amount of that for nothing. Right? I actually agree that Europe has been free riding on America for too long. And not only that, they were snotty about it. They would be like, it's so embarrassing that you guys don't have a huge welfare state and these 8-week vacations like we do. And what's wrong with you? It's like, well, we have to pay for your defense as well as our defense. We're paying for your prescription drugs as well as our prescription drugs. Maybe be a little grateful. They were like trust fund kids who lecture their parents on how their parents should be building the fortune that they are living off of. And I think that it is somewhat good that Europe has gotten the idea that, oh, like, actually, we're going to have to take more responsibility for our defense. And I think they're now a little worried also about things like pharmaceuticals as the United States starts copying some European style price controls. And as our vaccine policy has made us incredibly unreliable, right? The CEO of Moderna just said, we're not doing new vaccines because we're not putting any more into late stage trials because, if you can't go into the US market, nowhere else is going to pay for the R&D costs. So his critiques weren't entirely wrong. And they were never wrong, right? Like, people have been making this critique since the 80s, probably since the 60s. I wasn't alive then. But here's the thing, is that we got more, even though it was like not fair and all the rest of it, we got more out of that than we put into it. And we are losing without winning. It is incredibly distressing. And the idea that this is all some kind of 5D chess, that he's a master strategist, I'm sorry, no. It was true in real estate, where he was not much of a developer, and it's true now.
Yeah, that was the world he knew. This is a world he does not.
And those scheming Europeans managed to exploit us to such an extent that our GDP is half again as high as Germany's per capita.
Right. There is. I was just thinking as Megan was saying this, and we need to wrap this up. But there is. I agree that Europe, in some sense, was freeloading, and it was annoying when they were arrogant about it and they would lecture us about our lifestyle. On the other hand, you can make a case that if it's so obviously in your benefit to allow them to freeload, let them freeload a little bit. I mean, it works to our advantage in some respects. I mean, that's the world that we were running was built carefully on a bipartisan basis over the better part of 70 years. And we built it that way because it worked to our advantage. But we're moving on.
If just one thing, if you told Charlemagne that, or anybody from back then, that you could conquer all of Europe and have them under your security umbrella and have them all grateful for it, and doing your bidding, you would be considered the greatest tactical leader, strategic leader force in all of human history. I want European countries to pay more for their self-defense, but like we had it was just a massive
I mean, the whole logic behind destroying NATO is just completely insane. Like, what exactly is the upside to destroying NATO and dissolving it? I guess the logic here is like, we dissolve NATO, we focus on the Western Hemisphere, we pull out of the Middle East, we pull out of Europe, and then we establish better relations with Russia after dissolving NATO and let Russia freely trade with Europe, and then we get to have better relations with Russia, and it's kind of a win for Europe, for Russia, and for the United States, and then we pull Russia out of China's sphere of influence. I guess maybe that's the logic here, but like at the same time, Russia is not really a strong country. It presents this persona of civilizational strength and invincibility, but it's a facade. It's not real. What would make more sense would be to contain Russia to the extent that you can and establish stronger relationships, or rather establish a stronger relationship with China and have them basically hedge off of one another. I feel like that would make more sense, but maybe there's something I'm not maybe there's something I'm not getting at, or maybe there's something I'm not. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. But the whole logic behind dissolving NATO, which I feel increases our national security and comes with a lot more pros than cons. I just don't understand the logic for destroying it. I don't get it. Maybe people say it's about national sovereignty, but I still don't see the logic or the obvious benefits to dissolving it. I don't know. That's just me, though.
Continent-wide Chesterton's fence that these guys came in and smashed because they had no idea how good we had it.
Charlemagne also never
Continent-wide
imagined there would
chess
be such a thing as a French NBA star.
Okay, we're moving on. We need to wrap up. So I want to end today with a not worth your time that I'm going to put under the broad heading of injuries. And when I was originally thinking about this, there were several different kinds of injuries. It started sort of narrower, and now I've expanded it. I wrote a piece back in the Weekly Standard days about what my friends and I used to call old man injuries, and they ranged from the kind of silly injuries that you would get, and they were, we said old man, but they could easily apply to women as well. They were the kind of silly injuries you would get that you wouldn't have never gotten when you were a teenager or in your 20s, and more fit things like pulling a groin as you sat up from the toilet, or waking up one morning with a finger that you couldn't bend and you have no idea why that is the case. So that was the original idea, was to talk about old man injuries. But as we sort of kicked it around behind the scenes, we thought we would expand the injury discussion to include sort of weird injuries of all kinds. And it reminded me of one of my favorite pieces of writing, I think, of all time. And it was from Bill Bryson, who included this mini essay in a book called I'm a Stranger Here Myself. This is like 25 years ago. And he wrote about injuries that appear on the statistical abstract of the United States. And they are the strangest kinds of injuries you can imagine. And I'll read just a sentence of this, or a few sentences. Here's a fact for you. According to the latest statistical abstract of the United States, in 1 year, nearly 400,000 Americans suffered injuries involving beds, mattresses, or pillows. Think about that for a minute. That is more than 1,000 bed, mattress, or pillow injuries in a day. In the time it takes for you to read this piece, 4 of my fellow citizens will somehow manage to be wounded by their bedding. And he goes on and reads from a table called The Injuries Associated with Consumer Products. In 1992, almost 50,000 people in the United States were injured by pencils, pens, and other desk accessories. How do they do it? I've spent long hours seated at desks where I would have greeted almost any kind of injury as a welcome diversion, but never once have I come close to achieving actual bodily harm. So I want to ask you about weird injuries that you may have suffered, and I will lead, because as it happens, after I sent out an email yesterday sort of touching upon what I wanted to cover, I had one of these injuries. I live outside of Washington, D.C. You've all read about the storm. The way that the storm hit our area where I live was about 6 hours of snow covered by 18 hours of freezing rain. And so you have this weird phenomenon where the top of the covering is just ice, and the bottom is snow. And it's hard, even for somebody as fat as I am, to walk on top of it. I can walk on top of it without breaking through the ice, which means it's really strong. So I was going to do a hit on NBC yesterday. They sent out a big SUV, and I was walking to the car. I was wearing boots, and made my way across our front yard over to the driveway. Very nice driver waved at me, sort of gestured, kind of, do you need help? I assured him that I did not. I'm a gritty Wisconsinite. We don't need help in such moments as this. And then walked around the car to the passenger side and absolutely bit it. And there are 2 ways you can go down on ice like this. There's the kind of cartoon whoop whoop way where your legs go out from under you and you just crash on your back. And there's the other way that I think about, sort of beckons back to America's Funniest Home Videos, when you see somebody standing on a dock and they put their 1 foot on a boat, and then the boat kind of goes out from under them and they gradually do the splits. Well, that's how I went down yesterday. I kept falling. It's almost slow motion. I was carrying my sport coat. I was wearing my backpack. The sport coat, when I went to plant my left hand to brace myself, I did break through, went into the snow, totally covered in snow. The backpack slid underneath the front of the vehicle, and I found myself on my back like a turtle. And I could not, there was no way for me to get up. There was nothing for me to grab. It was ice everywhere. I tried to grab onto the ice. It didn't work. And so for 15 or 20 seconds, I was just kicking my arms and legs, as you might imagine, a turtle incapable of standing up. And the poor driver comes over, and he's wearing flat dress shoes. He wasn't going to be much help. He's, can I help you up? He couldn't help me up. There was nothing I could do. And finally, I was able, by force of gravity, like a turtle would, kind of flip myself over onto my front, facing directly down, and push myself up, at which point my legs went out from under me. Anyway, if this had been captured by our security cameras or something, this would be a sure $100,000 winner for America's Funniest Home Videos. Alas, it was not. Megan, do you have either a similar moment or incident or injury that would qualify as weird or funny?
Goodness, how much time do you have? So I once...
Okay, I think we get the point here. We've just about wrapped up. Really good stuff, though. I really like the stuff they had to say about ICE. That was good. And about the world order and about Trump and Iran. There was a lot of good material there. Let's switch back to full screen here. Okay. Any closing remarks? I guess, look, with the whole fascist thing, I think that the Trump administration is, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but you have to be able to perceive the canaries in the coal mine. I think that's very important. The polarization between the left and the right, it is irreconcilable. I mean, we haven't gotten anything done with Congress in who knows how long. And because our legislation, or rather our legislative branch, has been basically rendered obsolete, it forces the executive branch to rely on executive orders and top-down, government approaches. And that is indicative of this deep polarization. And like I said, this is something that is irreconcilable. And in a state like this, when the center is so hollowed out and the legislative branch can't get anything done, and it's just either party taking turns enforcing their will through executive orders, what we inevitably have is it's just this constant competition for executive power. And in those conditions, the strongest person will win, or at least it incentivizes the strongest person to just go all the way, the person in power to go all the way. And with the Trump administration, I mean, and just look at where the base is, man. It's insane. These people hate multiculturalism, they hate immigration, they hate democracy, they hate liberalism, they hate our institutions, and they're worried about being replaced. And so these people are basically, I mean, at this point, like, they're willing to basically vote in anybody who is willing to just enact the most radical right-wing policy. And like I said, this is a canary in the coal mine, and all these fascistic themes animate the base. And so if it's not full-on fascism, I guess people are scared to use that word. If it's not full-on fascism, it is at least something analogous. And it uses those themes to animate the base. And I think that at a certain point, once this becomes your template, once this is what works, this is what appeals to the base. I mean, we're seeing a right-wing civil war right now with this America First nationalist reactionary thing versus the neocon group. Once this is the rhetoric that animates the base and gets people out to vote, who's going to replace Trump? I mean, the only person I can think of who can replace Trump is somebody who's more hardcore. So like I said, this is where the right is, especially in my generation. And so because of that, you do have to, I mean, it is what it is. you got to be weary of where they are going, of where this side of the political right is going, and they're gaining more power and more influence. So it's just food for thought. But I guess with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I appreciate you guys for listening. If you liked, please, or if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, share, leave a comment. And until further ado, I'm out.